Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Today, we're heading into the forgotten corners of Texas, the places that no longer appear on maps and haven't been spoken of in decades. These are ghost towns where the roads didn't just disappear. They were erased. Trees grew overnight. Trails looped back. Locals stopped talking. And yet, the whispers remain. These are 20 true Texas ghost towns with no roads leading in or out places that once lived, breathed, and vanished without warning. From eerie towns sealed off by nature to those surrounded by something far darker, every story you'll hear tonight is rooted in truth and fear. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And when they do, they miss out on the darkest stories Texas has to offer. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because what you're about to hear, it only gets worse from here. So, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Let me know in the comments below, because out here, time has a way of getting lost, just like the roads. Now, let's take the first step into the woods and hope we find our way back. They say Cradle Hill was a logging town tucked somewhere in the pine-thick folds of East Texas, not too far from where Highway 59 veers toward Nacogdoches. The maps from the 50s show a narrow, squiggly line cutting into the woods county. Route 17, but you won't find that road now, not even if you dig through the land deeds or brush away the moss on the old signposts. It's as if the trees swallowed it whole and then pressed their roots down to keep it buried. People used to talk about the logging mill, the schoolhouse with the green shutters, the general store with the warped front steps, and a cat named Otto who never left the counter. The last census in 1958 listed 83 souls in Cradle Hill. By 1960, it was a ghost story. Not because of any war or plague, just absence. A full town that got eaten up by the woods. My Uncle Jack claimed he went there once, sometime in the summer of '57. Said he remembered the smell of fresh cut timber and molasses bread from the bakery near the well. He only visited once, delivering diesel barrels and fence posts in a beat-up GMC flatbed. The route was long, he said, and the trees got so dense near the last mile that the road felt like it was tunneling into a green throat. But it was all there back then. The church steeple, the sawmill, the houses with their porches sagging like tired old men. When he tried to return the next year, there was no road, no clearing. Just pine and oak stretching endlessly in every direction, and the air thick with the scent of sap and mildew. The strangest thing, he said, was that the trees didn't look young. They weren't sprouting. They were grown, aged 30, 40 years old at least. As if the forest had never been cleared at all. People laughed at him, called him dramatic. But Jack wasn't one to invent stories. He drank too much and swore even more, but he never lied. After he tried 3 times to find the town again and came back each time pale and quiet, he stopped talking about it altogether. Wouldn't even drive past the turnoff for County Route 17. It became a phantom limb on the local map present. In spirit, but gone in body. One year the route was removed entirely from the official highway register. No announcement. Just a blank space. I didn't think much of it until decades later, when I found an old postcard in a stack of my grandfather's belongings. It was addressed to my grandmother and postmarked July 15, 1959. The writing on the back was faded, but still legible. Weather's fine. Otto still begs for scraps. We'll bring you peach preserves from Dora's store. See you Monday. Love, Ruth. Ruth was my great aunt. She'd gone to visit a friend in Cradle Hill that summer and never came home. My family used to say she ran off with a traveling preacher. It was easier to believe that than the alternative. But now, holding the card in my hand, I felt something squirm in my gut, something cold and worm-like. A thought that burrowed deeper the longer I stared at that postmark. I became obsessed. Not in a storybook way, not like those guys who buy metal detectors and spend Sundays digging in parks. I mean the kind of obsession that keeps you up at 3 a.m. reading Dusty County records and satellite images. I traced Cradle Hill's last known coordinates from an oil company survey filed in 1956. I rented an ATV from a guy in Lufkin and told him I was looking for old deer stands in the forest. He gave me a knowing look but didn't press. The kind of man who knew when not to ask questions. It took me 6 hours to get close. The woods were thick, all right, not just overgrown oppressive. The air felt still, like the trees had sucked out the wind and were holding it hostage. My GPS gave up about 3 miles in. Just blinked out and wouldn't come back. Even the compass app on my phone spun like it was dizzy. But I kept going, swearing I'd find anything that proved Jack hadn't lost his mind. That? Cradle Hill had been real. And then I saw it, not the town. Not at first. Just a road. It wasn't paved, not anymore. The gravel was scattered, mostly eaten up by moss and vines, but it had the unmistakable shape of a roadbed, 2 parallel dips worn into the earth by decades of tires. My hands were shaking when I parked the ATV and stepped off. The silence was unbearable. No birdsong, no rustle of squirrels. Just the faint whisper of leaves above me, brushing against each other like dry skin on skin. I walked. The road curved gently uphill, where the tree canopy grew even tighter. I kept thinking of the name Cradle Hill, and it started to make sense. The way the hill rose into a kind of hollowed bowl, trees hugging it like arms. I could almost hear faint voices, laughter maybe, a dog barking in the distance. My rational mind screamed at me, told me it was imagination, audio pareidolia, forest acoustics. But some part of me, the old part that still remembered bedtime, prayers and creaking floors in my childhood home, whispered something else. I crested the hill and saw them. Houses. They looked intact. Not fresh, not modern, but preserved, like something in amber. Porches still standing, wind chimes still swaying, though there was no breeze. A rocking chair moved gently on its own. My throat went dry. I walked to the center of what I assumed was town. The well still stood, covered in ivy. A wooden sign leaned against it, faded but readable. Welcome to Cradle Hill, Est, 1893. I was trembling now. Not from fear, at least not yet, but from awe. This place shouldn't exist. And yet it did, here in the belly of the woods, untouched by time, unreachable by logic. I heard the cat before I saw him. A scratchy meow. There he was, just as the story said, a fat tabby with one ear bent, sitting on the stoop of the general store. Otto. That's when I realized how wrong it all was. The rocking chair wasn't just moving. It was creaking in rhythm like someone sat in it. The wind chimes weren't clinking, they were singing, high and low, like breath moving across glass. And the air god, the air smelled not of forest or pine, but of rot. Sweet, sticky rot. Like fruit left too long in the sun. Or something else. I stepped backward. A child's laugh echoed from the churchyard. Then another. A bell rang 3 times, clear and loud. I turned, heart hammering, and saw people stepping onto porches, smiling, watching me. Their clothes were old starched collars, gingham dresses, suspenders, but their faces weren't right. Too smooth, eyes too bright, skin too ... wrong, shiny, like wax that had been kept just warm enough not to melt. I ran. The trees didn't want me to leave. Every step I took, the path behind me changed. Branches lashed out, not falling but growing in real time, vines slithering like snakes across my boots. I fell once, maybe twice, I don't remember. All I know is I burst through a thicket and tumbled back onto real ground. Pine needles. Dry air. Sound. I didn't stop until I reached the ATV. My lungs burned. My ears rang. And the worst part? I couldn't find the road again. I swear I'd marked it. Not with chalk or tape, something internal, something instinctual. But it was gone. Not even disturbed soil. Just forest. I never went back. I don't tell people this story. Not out loud, but I keep that postcard. I keep Jack's old map. I even printed out a photo I took before my phone died, one blurry image of a signpost half buried in moss. You can't read it unless you already know what it says. But I know. It says Cradle Hill 2 miles. And if you ever find it, if the road opens for you, don't stop. Don't explore. Don't speak to anyone who waves. Whatever lives in Cradle Hill doesn't want visitors. It wants company. Elmdale wasn't on any map anymore, not even the old state survey records or faded railroad company ledgers. Ask a local in the county about it and you'd get a blank stare, maybe a mumbled, "You mean Elm Creek?" or a shrug like you'd asked about some long-dead relative. But folks who grew up around those hills remembered the name whispered like a bedtime warning. Not out of fear, though there was plenty of that, but out of habit, like they didn't want to risk inviting it back. It was an unmarked curve off Farm Road 1279, somewhere between Clifton and Meridian, nestled in a shallow hollow where the oaks turned black and knotty and the wind never seemed to blow quite right. You wouldn't even know you were in Elmdale unless you happened to pass the old mile marker that leaned at an angle and was slowly being swallowed by wild broom sedge. The paint had peeled off years ago, and the only thing left legible was the ghost of a number, 10. 10 miles from what? No one really knew. Years ago, back before people started disappearing, Elmdale had a train crossing. A proper one too, with lights and a bell and thick oak barriers that lowered with a heavy hydraulic hiss. The tracks cut straight through the town like a scar and then disappeared into the dense woods to the east, where no one ever laid new lines. Those woods weren't natural. You could feel it in your gut. They were too quiet, too still, like the birds knew better than to sing there. People said the trains used to run like clockwork. Every Tuesday and Friday, right around dusk, the eastbound freight would whistle through Elmdale. It wasn't listed on any regular schedule, no passengers, just long cars filled with something covered in canvas. The train never stopped. Didn't slow, didn't sound its horn beyond the crossing signal. And if you were unlucky enough to be near the tracks when it passed, they said the world felt wrong. The light changed, shadows twisted sideways, and your ears would ring for hours. Then, in the summer of 1953, it stopped, not the trains. They still came, but they never came out the other side. A dispatcher up in Waco reported losing contact with Freight 143 just past Meridian. A repair team was sent out, following the line, checking switches, thinking it might have derailed somewhere in the woods. They never found it. Not a scrap of metal, not a bent rail, not even a dropped bolt. The tracks went in, and that was it. Dead air. They never came out. 3 days later, another train was routed through. A shorter one, 2 engines and 5 cars, all loaded with concrete for a highway project in Bosque County. It vanished too. They shut the line down after that, quietly, without press or press release. The rail company packed up their Elmdale office overnight. Locals said men in suits showed up, closed off the crossing, and within a week, the entire length of track through Elmdale was pulled up and paved over. One day it was there. The next morning, nothing, not even the gravel bed. But some of us remember. I do, because I was there the night the last train came through. My name's Raymond Collier. I was 16 in 1953. My Uncle Henry was the crossing guard. Not the mechanical kind, the real kind. They used to have men stationed at the more rural crossings in case of failures or animal obstructions. He'd sit in a little brick shack with a stove and a lantern and a shortwave radio, reading Louis L'Amour paperbacks and waiting for the one train that came through. That night, I was staying over with him. My parents were off in Temple visiting. My aunt, who was dying of something I was too young to understand. Henry didn't like kids much, but he let me tag along because I knew how to keep quiet. We played checkers on a splintered board and drank orange sodas. The air outside was too still, like a held breath. I remember the cicadas stopped singing around 9. Just went dead quiet like someone flicked a switch. Henry kept checking his watch. "Shoulda come by now," he muttered. I didn't say anything. The lantern in the corner kept hissing, and I watched its glow warble on the walls. Then we heard it, far off, not like a train but like a low, slow moan carried on the wind. The radio crackled with static even though no one was talking. I looked at Henry, and he was already walking toward the shack door. His hand trembled on the knob. "Stay here," he said. I didn't listen. I followed him out and stood by the crossing post. The lights weren't flashing. The gate didn't drop. But the ground started humming. Not shaking, not rumbling, humming, like an engine idling deep beneath the earth. Then we saw it. No headlight. No chuff of steam or diesel growl. Just the train moving through the darkness, its cars gliding silently like shadows against the trees. They looked old, older than any I'd seen. Rusted, weather-beaten, windows painted black. And on the side of one, I swear to this day, was something like a face. Not painted, pressed, like a man's screaming imprint warped into the metal. Mouth open, eyes bulging, hands reaching. Henry fell to his knees. I couldn't move. My legs locked up. I remember the air smelled wrong like burnt wires and cold dirt. And then it stopped. The train halted right in front of us, on a crossing that didn't exist anymore. I swear to you, it was there. Just there, silent and still, and I could hear someone moving inside the cars. A scrape, a shuffle, a whisper. The door to the nearest car slid open just a crack, and something stepped out. I don't know how to describe it right. It was man-shaped, but too tall, too thin, like someone had stretched it out and wrapped it in burlap. Its head jerked like a dog sniffing wind. It looked right at Henry and made this noise like gears grinding underwater. Henry screamed. Loud, high-pitched, terrified. He scrambled back into the shack and locked the door. I couldn't move. It turned its head toward me. I didn't see eyes, just holes. Deep, empty sockets where something inside breathed out cold. Then the thing took a step forward and vanished. The train was gone. No whistle. No roar, just silence and an empty stretch of road. I ran. I don't remember the rest of that night. I woke up in the grass behind the gas station 2 miles down, covered in dirt and shaking like I'd been dropped in ice water. They found Henry the next morning, dead in the shack. No wounds, no signs of struggle, just dead. Eyes wide, mouth open. Like he'd seen something and never stopped screaming. They buried him quick. No autopsy. A week later, the rail company came. Tore everything up. Bulldozed the land flat. No one asked questions. And soon, no one remembered. But I do. Because sometimes at night, I still hear that hum, and when I drive past where the tracks used to be, my headlights flicker. The radio crackles. And for just a second, the road doesn't look like a road. It looks like rails. And I wonder how long I have before the train comes back. They say you can still hear the bells ringing if you're quiet enough in the woods near Sabine County, deep east where the pine trees start thick and the roads narrow until they feel more like trails. It's just after midnight when the silence, Breaks, no wind, no insects, just that sharp, echoing toll that doesn't belong. Locals don't talk about Marrow's End unless they've been drinking or trying to scare city folk. They say the town isn't on any map anymore. And even if you found it, you wouldn't stay long. You wouldn't be able to, because the roads don't lead out, they turn back. Always back. I first heard the name when I was working a freelance. Piece on forgotten Texas settlements, ghost towns, dry bones of places people left behind. My editor had a thing for the spooky Angelos towns with names like Vulture's Roost or Devil's Draw. Marrow's End didn't show up on any county records, but it kept surfacing in odd places, buried in microfiche newspapers and faded. Obituaries in the margins of handwritten sermons from Baptist archives. The earliest reference was from 1894, Rev. Isaiah. Boone has claimed divine right to settle land east of the Sabine with 19 righteous souls. Henceforth, we shall call it Marrow's End, for we are stripped to the bone and reborn in him. Boone was a fire and brimstone preacher who'd gone off the rails, apparently. He'd gathered a small following and marched them into the woods one October morning, never to return. Not a single body, grave, or trace was found. A manhunt was launched after a few of the families back in Tyler started asking questions. Sheriffs, deputies went in and came back saying the land turned them around. Compasses spun. Horses panicked. One deputy went mad and slit his own wrists a week later in a sanatorium, raving about the sky folding inside itself and hymns written. In the trees. I should have left it there, but curiosity and a deadline are a dangerous mix. I drove out on a Sunday morning with a backpack, water, snacks, a notebook, and an old topo map. I parked near a dried creek bed and started walking east, following Boone's last known trail, or what little remained of it. The sun stayed fixed high in the sky longer than it should have, and the woods grew dense fast. The pines bent in odd directions, like something had twisted their growth unnaturally, and I noticed deer prints suddenly vanished in the dirt trail like the animal had disappeared mid-step after about an hour. I came to a break in the trees where everything went quiet. That's the first time I noticed it, how the woods had gone completely dead. No birds, no wind. Just this waiting feeling, like holding your breath before a scream. There was a gate there, old wrought iron twisted and rusted, hanging off. One hinge. Beyond it, the outline of a town emerged like a memory wooden building slouched from age. Overgrown paths and a little chapel at the far end that looked in better condition than the rest. Something about it made my stomach sink, like it had been used recently. I stepped through the gate, half expecting my phone to vibrate, but there was no signal. The town was silent, empty, yet things hadn't been abandoned in the usual way. It didn't feel like people had left. It felt like they'd been taken. Tables were still set inside homes. An old rocking chair shifted ever so slightly on a porch with no breeze. There was no dust, no decay, just emptiness. When I turned to leave, the gate was gone, not swung shut gone. The road I'd come in on was no longer there. In its place was just more forest. I walked in what I thought was the direction I came from for about 15 minutes until I ended up right back in front of the chapel. I walked a different way, this time north, climbing over a crumbling fence and marking trees with a penknife as I went. Again, I returned to the chapel, only this time from the opposite side. I kept trying, over and over. Hours passed. My legs ached, my water ran low. Every path curved back on itself. Even the sun, when I could see it through the thick branches, barely moved. It felt wrong, like time was suspended in molasses. And always, no matter what, I ended up back in front of that damn chapel. Eventually, I stopped trying and went inside. The air within was colder than outside, though there were no windows and no signs of insulation. The pews were intact, but something was wrong with them. They were too clean, polished, as if someone had just wiped them down. The walls were lined with passages from the Book of Revelation, written in a black, oily ink that shimmered when I turned my flashlight on them. They didn't look handwritten. They looked drawn by something that didn't understand handwriting but tried anyway. At the altar stood a portrait of Reverend Boone. His eyes were painted too large, the pupils too dark, the smile too wide. He stared right through me. I backed out and sat on the chapel steps, breathing hard, trying to figure out if I was having some kind of episode, maybe a gas leak, some kind of mass hallucination effect. I looked down at my notepad. What I'd written since arriving in town was in a script I didn't recognize. My handwriting, but twisted curved too sharply, dipped too deeply. The sentences repeated phrases over and over. The marrow is the message. The marrow is the message. I flipped to a blank page and tried to write a message to myself, my name, my address, a plea for help. It came out wrong. My name ended in characters I'd never seen before. My address bent backward on the page. The ink bled and sank into the paper like it was being absorbed. That night, or what passed for night, I stayed in one of the houses. There was no moon, but the trees around the town shimmered faintly like they were covered in ash or glass. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up to the sound of a bell tolling. It rang 13 times. I got up and opened the front door, and the entire town was standing outside. Not the buildings. The people. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They were just there, lined along the dirt paths and porches and roads, dressed in old Sunday clothes, mud-streaked and wet-eyed. Men with rotted Bibles tucked under their arms. Women holding children with jawless grins. Their skin was too pale, stretched tight, and they all stared directly at me. At their center stood Boone. He looked the same as his portrait, same clothes, same two large eyes, same crooked smile that split too far into his cheeks. He raised his hand, and in a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere at once, said, "The marrow sings to the righteous. You have heard it. You belong to it now." And the town blinked. Not in the usual way, but as one, all at once. Like the sky dimmed and the ground hiccuped and reality itself stuttered. When it cleared, they were gone again. Every last one of them. But the town remained, and I couldn't leave. Not the next day. Not the next week. I don't remember how long I stayed. Time didn't work there. My clothes never tore. My beard never grew. Hunger came, but it didn't bite the way it should have. I slept, but only briefly, and the dreams were not my own. I saw memories from other lives. Watched myself join their sermons. I knelt beside Boone, chanting in the tongue carved into the trees. I only escaped because I stopped trying to. I sat in the chapel one morning and spoke aloud, "I accept the marrow." I don't know why. I think I meant it as a test. The walls pulsed. Boone's painting blinked. And I passed out. When I woke up, I was lying in the dried creek bed where I'd first parked. My backpack was rotted. My notebook gone. My phone cracked, but somehow working. It had been 13 minutes, but my fingernails were black. My handwriting is still wrong. Certain letters curl backward when I'm not paying attention. I dream in the script from those walls. And sometimes, in the mirror, my smile looks too wide. I haven't gone back. I wouldn't know how. But sometimes around midnight I hear bells. And they're getting louder. They say if you find yourself driving too far past the old cattle fencing on Route 16 near Grayson County, long after the road markers vanish and the hills start to lean in on you, you'll hear it. Not right away, but it'll catch you in that quiet moment between thoughts. A bell, faint, rhythmic, coming from deep in the pines where there's no town, no trail, and definitely no church. Just woods that don't make sense and fog that comes even when there's no change in the weather. I wasn't looking for trouble when I heard it the first time, just tired. I was driving back from Sherman in my old F-150, coming in late from a job site cleanup. I remember the sky was pale, the kind of gray that made it hard to tell if it was still dusk or already past it. I'd driven this stretch before hundreds of times, but that night something felt off. The road narrowed sooner than I remembered. My high beams didn't seem to catch the edge of the shoulder like usual, and the trees looked taller, closer somehow, like they'd grown overnight and were leaning just a little too far over the blacktop. Rolled the windows down to shake off the sleep. That's when I heard it. Distant, but deliberate. The sound of a bell ringing. A big one. Like the kind that used to call people to service or warn a town of fire. 1, 2, 3 rings. Then, silence. I slowed down, thinking maybe someone was working on a farm bell or had a big cowbell out for God knows what reason. But there were no houses back here. Nothing but woods. Then it rang again. 3 more. Same rhythm. I can't say why, but I pulled over. Something about the sound, it wasn't just loud, it was full. Like it didn't echo in the woods, it filled them. I killed the engine and sat there, window still down, waiting. The crickets had gone quiet. That was the second thing that struck me. Texas woods always hum at night, always. But now it was dead still, like nature itself was holding its breath. I got out. I know. I should have just driven on, should have chalked it up to some weird acoustic fluke. But there was something in that bell that tugged at me. Not a sound you hear, more like something you feel in your chest, low and steady. I walked toward the tree line, gravel crunching under my boots. I figured I'd just go far enough to see if there was some old bell tower left from one of those. Forgotten Texas ghost towns. The fog came quick, like a wave rolling through the trees. Thick and low, curling around my knees and hands. I pushed through the underbrush and found nothing. No trail, no ruins, no footprints, not even broken fencing. But the bell rang again. Closer now, I turned back. That's when I realized I couldn't see my truck. Not just a little lost gone. I was maybe 50 yards into the woods, maybe less, but the trees had shifted. The woods didn't look like what I'd walked through. And when I turned around to look where I'd just been, there was no path. Just more trees, more fog. The bell rang again behind me this time. I walked fast. Not running, something in me said not to run. You run from the wrong thing out here and it knows. I followed the sound, hoping it might lead me out. But with every ring, the trees grew older. You ever notice that? How trees in old woods look tired. Their bark sags like wrinkles and the branches droop like old arms. That's what they looked like now. Like I was walking deeper into the past, into something old and waiting. Then I saw it. The steeple dot half covered in moss and fog, rising from behind a line of dead elms. A church, real old clapboard style, with stained glass windows covered in soot or ash or something black. The bell rang again, and I realized it wasn't ringing from the steeple, it was ringing under it. I pushed the creaky door open. It didn't groan like it should have, just opened smooth and quiet, like it was used to being opened by folks like me. Inside was darker than it should have been. No pews, no altar. Just long rows of wood where people must have sat once, and a hole where the pulpit would be. A trapdoor opened. The bell rang again. From below. It smelled like rot. Not just decay, but something older, wet earth and rusted iron, and something that reminded me of dried blood on concrete. I didn't want to go down, but I did. I stepped onto the creaking stairs, each groan feeling like a warning in my bones. Stairs went down farther than made sense. way deeper than any church basement had a right to go. The walls changed halfway, first wood, then stone, then dirt. I started to see symbols etched into the sides, not crosses. Something twisted. Like vines, but wrong. Like they grew from meanings no one speaks anymore. The bell stopped ringing. I found myself in a wide chamber, lit faintly. Not by lamps or bulbs, but by these pale blue fungi clinging to the walls. In the center was the bell, huge, blackened, hanging from a rusted frame. It swayed slowly, like it had just been rung, but there was no rope. No mechanism. Around it were figures. Not people. They stood upright, but their arms were too long, faces smooth, like skin grown over features. They didn't move, just stood, hands clasped, facing the bell. All of them, silent, waiting. Then one turned toward me. I don't remember walking toward it, but I did. I stepped into the ring of things. The one that turned tilted its head like it was hearing something far off. Then it raised its hand and pointed at me. The bell rang. The sound this time was wrong. Like it didn't happen in my ears, it happened inside me. I felt it in my gut, behind my eyes. My vision blurred. I saw flickers of things that didn't belong in this world, flashes of eyes in the roots of trees, mouths opening beneath the water of lakes, a sky that blinked back at me. Then darkness. I woke up in the driver's seat of my truck, pulled off. Neatly on the shoulder of Route 16. The sky was clear, stars out. Engine off, keys on the passenger seat. No fog, no trees leaning in, just night. I checked my phone. It was 3 days later. No one believed me. They never do. Sighed. I must have blacked out, heat stroke, maybe hit my head. But I know what I saw. I still hear it sometimes when I drive too far past the fencing, too late in the night. That bell, low and deep. They say there's no town called Grayson Hollow, no church that deep in the woods. But folks have gone missing out there. Not many, but enough to keep the locals nervous. And every now and then, someone hears a bell. And they go looking, but they don't come back. Or worse, they do. But not all the way. Wolf Junction wasn't on most maps anymore, not the new ones anyway. It used to be a proud little blot in the dusty spine of East Texas. Founded back in the 1880s as a stopover point for a freight line that was supposed to connect Houston to the far northern ranches. The old folks called it the town that waited. Waited for the trains, waited for the boom, waited for salvation that never came. They said it with bitterness in their teeth, like the dust that never washed out of your mouth, no matter how hard you scrub it. I found it by accident. Or maybe not accident. Maybe something older and meaner pulled me toward it. I'd been driving east out of Tyler, cutting across back roads because I couldn't stand the highway anymore. I was running, not from the law or from anyone, really, just from my own life. My girlfriend had left, my job had shriveled to nothing, and my dad, the last anchor I had, died in a hospice bed with a television droning game shows he couldn't hear. After the funeral, I packed everything I owned into the back of a beat-up Silverado and pointed it at nowhere. I saw the sign for Wolf Junction off FM 1362, a rusted sheet metal thing, leaning like it wanted to fall but couldn't quite commit. To it, just the name, hand-painted in peeling white, Wolf Junction. No arrow, no distance, no welcome. I almost missed the turn because the road was barely there, cracked blacktop that faded to gravel, then to dirt, then something that didn't feel like road at all. But I kept going. The tires slipped in the ruts and the trees crowded in, bending like they were whispering to one another. I should have turned back when the pavement disappeared. But I didn't. Not when the first fence post toppled in the woods, not when I Saw the rusted hulk of a truck with no wheels, not even when the wind started carrying a sound that didn't fit the season, not wind chimes or birdsong, but something slower, heavier. Like metal groaning under weight. Wolf Junction didn't appear all at once. It leaked into view the way a bruise darkens under skin. First came the skeletal outlines of houses, sagging porches, doors hanging from hinges, windows so dirty they looked blind. Then the depot, dead center, squatting like a forgotten god. It still had the name carved above the door, Wolf Junction Rail and Freight, the letters chipped but readable. Tracks led away from it in both directions, but only for a few yards. Beyond that, the land had cracked and swelled, buckled and shifted, like the earth was trying to forget those iron rails had ever been there. I parked without thinking. The truck sat oddly, tilted, as if the tires couldn't quite grip the ground anymore. I stepped out, and the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not just quiet, silence, the kind that presses into your skull until your own heartbeat sounds like thunder. There was no wind, no birds, not even the whine of bugs in the heat. Just heat and dust and stillness. The depot door stood open. I walked toward it, crunching over gravel that wasn't gravel anymore, more like bone-white chunks of something that crumbled underfoot. Inside, the air was cooler. Not refreshing, more like a cellar, damp and sour, as if something had been rotting for a long time and forgot to finish. Shelves lined the walls, empty now, but stained with oil and soot. There was a ticket booth, too, with the glass shattered inward and a stool still behind it, half swallowed by mildew and spiderwebs. I found the first journal upstairs. The stairs creaked like a warning, but I climbed anyway. A single room stretched across the top floor. Desk, cot, a rusted stove in the corner. Whoever had lived there had kept notes, maybe to fight off madness. The pages were yellowed and curled, but the ink was still legible. March 3rd, 1951. No. Train today. That makes 64 days. We hear the whistle sometimes, but the tracks are broken. We dug them up in places, thinking maybe that would stop the noise. It didn't. April 12th. Something is under the station. It breathes when we sleep. I woke up and saw the floorboards rising like a chest. I think it smells us. Thinks we're part of the cargo. May 9th. The land moves at night. I watched the road vanish. It folded inward like paper burning, but backward, like it was never meant to lead out. I stopped reading after that. My hands were shaking. I don't know why I stayed. Maybe the same thing that brought me there, whatever whisper had twisted my steering wheel toward that rotting road, didn't want me to leave. I told myself it was curiosity, some misplaced journalist's instinct. But that was a lie. I stayed. The night in the truck. Couldn't bring myself to sleep in the depot. Not with the feeling that the whole building was watching me, like an animal deciding whether or not to pounce. The stars above Wolf Junction looked different, too close, too sharp. Like holes poked in some curtain just beyond reach. Around midnight. I heard it, a long, low whistle. Not the wind, not a memory, not imagination. It echoed through the town like it was bouncing off invisible walls. I sat bolt upright, heart punching my ribs. The sound came again, louder, and this time I saw light. Not the kind from flashlights or headlights. This was pale, almost silver, and it glowed from the broken tracks like the bones of something buried and rising. Then came the sound of wheels, screeching, metal on metal, but there were no rails. No. Train. I saw shapes moving past the depot. Tall, thin, dragging shadows that flickered in and out of existence, like watching a movie frame stutter through a broken projector. I swear I saw men in conductors' uniforms, mouths open in frozen screams, eyes gone white, their bodies pulled along by invisible chains. The truck wouldn't start. I Turned the key until it screamed nothing. Something was wrong with the ground. The tires were half sunken, like the land had gone soft, like it was eating. I left the truck and ran, not toward the road. There was no road anymore. Just trees and dirt and the same fence post I'd seen that morning. Only now it stood in front of me again, bent in the same way, rusted in the same spot. I kept walking, trying to find an angle that changed, a path that didn't circle. Hours passed, maybe more. Eventually, I gave up and collapsed by the depot, too tired to be afraid. That's when I heard the voice. It wasn't loud. It was steady, calm, like a preacher reading scripture through a crack in a confessional booth. You're on the manifest now. I didn't see anyone, just the wind picking up and that voice fading into it, like smoke curling away from fire. The sun rose, but the air stayed gray. The town looked even older in daylight, if that was possible. The roads were gone. The truck was gone. Nothing around me moved. Not even my shadow. That was 4 days ago. Or maybe more. I stopped counting. The depot doesn't let you leave once you hear the whistle. The tracks may be gone, but the train still arrives, and it's always hungry. They say the Trinity River splits and curls through certain parts of East Texas like a serpent looking to coil around something and choke the life from it. That's just local folklore, most folks figure, except for one place where the old-timers still won't speak above a whisper when it comes up Rafter Bend. It's not on most maps anymore. Used to be a timber town back when the river was the main way to haul lumber south. Now it's just a memory tucked between thick cypress woods, waterlogged banks, and stories passed around over cigarettes and bourbon. Folks say the river changed course over time until it wrapped the town in a full loop, isolating it like an island without a bridge. And once it looped, it started taking. My Uncle Donnie was the first one who told me about it, back when I was 15 and helping him clear brush behind his fishing cabin. We were burning logs, swatting mosquitoes, and I asked him if he'd ever seen a place called Rafter Bend. The name came up in a book I'd found in his attic, a journal from some surveyor who mapped out East Texas routes in the 30s. Donnie dropped his axe mid-swing, just let it fall like it had gone hot in his hands. He didn't answer for a long while, then finally muttered, "You don't go past the bend in the river, boy. Not unless you're looking to stay." That was enough to keep me away for years. But as things go, I couldn't let it go. Not entirely. I got older, went off to college, came back, bought some land of my own near the river. The world had gotten louder, noisier, more connected, and the quiet of that place started to call to me again. I started hiking the old paths near the water, trying to follow the rough loop I'd traced in that old surveyor's notes. Most of the trails were gone now, swallowed by undergrowth or rerouted by floodwaters. But there were signed stone markers, rusted nails in trees, fence posts broken in half and sunk into the earth like jagged teeth. And there was that sound. It didn't hit me at first. Just a weird silence when you got too close to the water. Birds would stop singing. The breeze would die out. Then you'd hear it paddling. Just soft splashes, steady and distant. Like someone in a canoe moving upriver, even if there wasn't a boat in sight. Sometimes I'd shout. Nothing answered. Sometimes I stayed still long enough to see ripples cross the water without wind, like something had dipped into it and moved on. Then I found the sign, or what was left of it. One corner of a wooden post still jutted from the ground, covered in moss and lichen. You could barely make out the letters, but I knew what they said. Ra, and then some rot, then bend. The trees grew thicker past that point, the canopy like a curtain drawn across a stage you weren't meant to see. But I went through. I followed a dry wash that dipped into the loop of the river, and that's where I saw the town, or what was left of it. It was nestled in a low basin, Half submerged in swampy fog, the buildings grayed and sagging under the weight of time. Wood shingles hung loose. Porches leaned like drunken men. A church steeple jutted from the mist. The cross bent sideways. No sound, no birds, no wind. Just the steady lap of water against old pilings. I didn't go far in. I knew better, but curiosity's a bastard. I found a small dock half sunk in muck, and tied to it was a boat metal hull. Maybe 12 foot, looked newer than the rest. I checked it. No moss, no rust. A thermos sat inside, still warm. That's when I felt eyes on me. I turned slow, real slow, like the woods had grown teeth and were waiting for a reason to close in. And there, just inside the tree line, stood a man. Couldn't see his face, just his outline. He didn't move, didn't speak. I backed away, 1 foot at a time, never. Turning, I left the town, crossed the dry wash again, marked the path in my head. I didn't stop moving until I hit the county road. That should have been the end of it. I told myself I imagined the man, that the boat belonged to some drunk hunter who wandered too deep and forgot the way back. I tried to stay away, but dreams are funny things. I started waking up soaked in sweat, hearing paddles in my ears. And then came the phone call. My cousin Derek was a game warden. Hard-headed, ex-military, didn't believe in ghost stories. He called me up one night, said someone had reported a missing hiker near the bend. Young girl, college student. Her GPS pinged once before the signal vanished. I didn't say anything about what I'd seen, just offered to help look. We went. Out early the next morning. Mist clung to the trees. The sun tried to cut through it but gave up by noon. We split up, radioed every half hour. I followed the dry wash back toward the loop, thinking maybe she'd seen the same ruins I had, the same dock, same boat. When I got to the town, I found something different. The boat was gone, but footprints trailed the muddy edge of the dock. Small, bare, like a woman's, and next to those prints were another set larger, deeper. The mud still fresh. I called out. No answer. Not even the frogs croaked. I took one step toward the church, and then I saw her standing in the doorway. Barefoot, dress torn, eyes wide like they'd been pried open with wire. She didn't say a word, just stared. I asked if she was hurt, if she could walk. She didn't move. Then something stepped out behind her. It wasn't the man I'd seen before. It was taller, bonier, hunched over like the skin didn't fit right. Its head scraped the top of the doorway. Long arms hung past its knees, the fingers tipped in something sharp and black. It didn't lunge, didn't scream. It just raised a hand and pointed to the river. The girl blinked. Her face twisted, like she was about to scream but couldn't. Then she turned around and walked straight back into the church. I heard the door slam. The fog thickened. I turned and ran. Derek found me an hour later, still panting, curled up under a cedar with my radio dead in my hand. He asked if I'd seen her. I said no. I lied. They never found her. Search crews spent 2 weeks combing the woods, dragging the river. Nothing. The official report said she likely drowned, swept away in an undercurrent. Her family held a memorial. Derek never talked to me again, but the river talks. You just have to listen. You'll hear it at night sometimes if you live close enough. That paddling, steady, rhythmic, like someone circling. Folks disappear every year. Kayakers, hikers, even fishermen who swear they know the water better than their own hands. The river doesn't forget. And Rafter Bend is still there, waiting, still looped in on itself like a noose tightening with time. Boats don't come back, neither do hikers. And the church bell, you'll hear it too if you're close. A low, dull clang that echoes over the trees even though there's no wind and no hands to ring it. Only watchers, waiting, still. forever. They say Blythe's Rest was never supposed to be a town. It was just a field flat and low, thick with blue grama and mesquite scrub, where one family laid down roots because their wagon broke an axle and they didn't have enough money or strength to keep going. That was in 1887. The Blythe buried the father in a shallow grave dug with a spoon and a chisel, built a sod house out of the ground they'd bled into, and stayed. Then others came, just a handful, drawn not by promise, but by absence. Of law, absence of neighbors, absence of roads. For a while it was just the Blythe, a few ranchers who kept to themselves, and a preacher who arrived out of nowhere and claimed he'd seen God's breath rise off the soil like mist. They all said that something breathed beneath the dirt dot by 1946. Blythe's Rest had a chapel, a schoolhouse with broken windows patched with newspaper, and a crooked general store that sold flour, shells, and jars of pickled things nobody ever saw grow, but it wasn't on any official map. The county surveyors who came once every few years wrote it down as unincorporated rural zone, no maintained roads. They didn't go in. Folks around the nearby towns Springwell, Conco, even as far as Midland heard of it, mostly from whispers, usually from someone who came back wrong. One old ranch hand from Odessa went to deliver feed there in '52. Came back 3 days later barefoot, silent, and never put on boots again. Said his solace still felt the gravel. Died in a bathtub filled with dirt dot in 1984. The county finally decided enough was enough. A drunk deputy crashed his cruiser trying to follow the access road. What passed for one out past Turner Creek and found nothing but white stones under his tires. That was the last straw. The county bulldozers came in mid-June, all humming. And bluster, heat shimmering off their metal hides. They ripped up the road leading into Blythe's Rest, plowed the topsoil, laid fresh tar, then sealed the land with orange barrels and signs that read, "No access, private property, county." Order 8411B. The work crews stayed overnight at a motel 10 miles out, played poker, drank beer, and laughed about ghost towns. They left behind a flat scar of blacktop that led to nowhere. The next morning, the road was back. Not the paved one. That was gone. No trace of the tar or the barrels. In its place, a long, winding trail of gravel. Bone-colored, dry, and sharp-edged like shattered antler. It crunched loud under the boots of Sheriff Hal Granger when he came out to inspect it. Hal had been sheriff going on 22 years and had seen just about everything a man could see. In Pecos County, dead cattle arranged in circles, kids who swore up and down they'd seen lights rising out of ponds, an old woman who hung herself and was found 4 days later standing upright in her kitchen with eyes open and smiling. But that road, it didn't match anything. He sent 2 deputies up it. Neither came back. 3 hours passed, then 6. By sundown, he drove up it himself. Took the patrol Bronco slow, crunching through the gravel. The dust was pale and clung to the tires like flour. 10 minutes up the road, his radio sputtered and died. 15 minutes in, the sun seemed wrong higher than it should be. At 20 minutes, he saw a small wooden sign nailed to a fence post. Blythe's Rest, Est, 1887. He stopped the car. Not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't remember why he was driving anymore. He sat with both hands on the wheel, looking at the sign, feeling like it was watching him instead. Then he turned around, didn't find the deputies. Didn't talk much afterward either. The county tried again a week later. More bulldozers. This time they dug 3 feet deep, poured salt into the dirt, and trucked in gravel from San Angelo. They installed floodlights, a camera, set up a motion-activated transmitter. The camera recorded 34 hours of footage before it shorted out. In the footage, you could see the workers leave, the lights flicker, and the gravel darken like it was soaking up something thick and invisible. At 2:13 a.m., a shape moved across the edge of the screen. Just a silhouette, hunched and twitching. The frame froze for 7 hours. Then the feed went black. The gravel road returned by morning. Nobody could say what it was made of. University geologists came out, took samples, left confused. The stones weren't limestone or granite, not anything from Texas. They were porous, fibrous, off-white. When cut open, they smelled faintly like spoiled meat and old perfume. One grad student swore they screamed if you cracked them fast enough. Another burned his hand and said it wasn't from heat, but from memory he saw his grandfather die in the flame. They stopped testing after that. Blythe's Rest didn't show up on maps, but every so often, GPS would glitch and reroute truckers through it. A few hikers wandered too far and left notes in state park logbooks that said things like gravel, road with no shade, felt like something was watching, and heard a baby crying under the rocks. One family driving to Big Bend took the wrong exit near Fort Stockton and disappeared. The father's cell phone pinged near the old access road, then went dead. When state police came to investigate, they found only one thing bone-colored. Gravel pressed into the soil in a perfect tire-width trail, leading into the scrub. Locals started placing offerings near the road's start. Bottles of whiskey, baby shoes, crosses carved into coyote skulls. One man built a chain-link gate that locked itself from the inside. He said it was the only thing that worked. 3 nights later, his dogs were found flayed and stacked neatly beside it. The gate stood open. No one bulldozed again after that, but the road stayed. You'd find it sometimes, after heavy rain or drought when the land cracked or steamed. Bone-colored gravel snaking through cactus and ghost cedar. It looked like it had always been there, like the land had birthed it from underneath. I went once, not on purpose. I was looking for a missing woman, 43, divorced, known for wandering off. Her sister said she'd been obsessed with ghost towns and old cemeteries. Said she'd been talking about Blythe's Rest like it was real. I didn't believe her. I was with the sheriff's office out of Crane back then. Took my cruiser out early, sun barely up, just fog and the chirring of bugs. Then I saw the road. It wasn't there on the map, but my wheels crunched over it like it had always been under me. My chest felt tight. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I followed it for maybe 15 minutes, every bend looking the same. The mesquite closing in tighter, the sun weird and floaty. Above the scrub like it didn't belong. Then I saw her standing in the middle of the road, wearing white, smiling. She held out a jar. I didn't stop. I reversed until the car nearly skidded, then gunned it back the way I came. I didn't tell the office. I filed it as unresolved natural disappearance, but I still hear the gravel at night, in my driveway, when the wind's too still and the crickets go quiet, crunching like someone's walking slow, dragging their heels. People talk about Blythe's Rest like it's gone, like the road was ever really a road, but it's still there, still waiting, still growing. And if you find yourself heading west past Turner Creek, if your GPS cuts out and the dirt turns pale under your wheels, don't stop. Don't look for signs. Don't listen when the rocks start whispering names you recognize. Because once you're on it, the road doesn't care who you are, only that you rest. They say the ridge don't take kindly to being remembered. You can drive straight past it and not notice a thing unless you already know what you're looking for. And even then, it's like the land folds in on itself the moment you blink. 1 minute you're staring at a sloping rise of old Texas brush and rock, and the next, it's just black soil and scorched cedar. No ridge line, no trailhead, No sign of the man who tried to cut the earth open 100 years ago and drag its secrets to daylight. They called it Black Ant Ridge because from a distance the mine workers used to look like a swarm of insects crawling up the cliffside, disappearing into a mouth that always seemed too dark, even in full sun. There's no record of when the mining stopped, only that it did, and that none of the original workers were ever buried proper. The place still gets talked about in the back booths of greasy diners between Taylor and Rockdale. Not by name, mind you, just little warnings wrapped in casual local drawl. Don't follow old maps. Don't trust the compass past mile marker 184. Don't hike east of the Brazos when the earth smells sweet, like rotting fruit. Most of the time, it's just campfire stuff. Spooky tales meant to scare city folk, but sometimes ... Sometimes someone new goes looking. That's what happened with Clay Marin. He wasn't born local. Moved in from Arizona after his wife left. Him and the construction company folded. Said he wanted peace and quiet, maybe write a book. He was one of those guys who got real interested in forgotten places. Old silos, train tunnels, graveyards where the names had long eroded. He asked around town, poking his nose where it didn't belong, smiling in that way outsiders do when they think your stories are all made up. Most folks brushed him off. A few gave him breadcrumbs just to shut him up. One too many beers at Len's Tavern, and someone finally muttered, "Check the ridgeline past Old Bailey's Creek. You'll find your black gold stories there." Clay left early the next morning with a pack, a drone, and a map so old it's still called Taylorville. He never came back. At first people figured he got lost, or bit by a copperhead, or maybe just ran off. But a week later his truck was found on the shoulder near a collapsed fence line. No signs of a struggle, no boot prints leading out. Just the engine still warm and a faint smell on the wind, earthy, metallic, and sweet. Like blood left too long in the sun. The sheriff organized a search party, mostly volunteers. They brought dogs, helicopters, even a team from Austin who specialized in wilderness recovery. They combed the area for days, finding nothing but ash-colored rocks and trees that grew gnarled in odd directions, twisting not toward the sun, but away from it. Every compass brought pointed dead north, no matter how they spun. GPS blinked out, and phones drained down to black screens within minutes of entry. Then there was the girl, 11 years old, out with her daddy checking on a deer, feeder near that same stretch of woods. She wandered off a bit, just out of sight, and came back crying. Said she saw a man underground. Said he was crawling in the dirt, face all cracked like dry mud, eyes like burnt glass. Kept whispering her name even though she never told it to him. Her daddy told her to hush and walked her back to the truck. But he never brought her hunting again. The old-timers started whispering again after that. Said the ridge had turned angry. That digging into the earth back then hadn't just stirred up rock, it had cracked something older. Something buried deep beneath Texas limestone and red clay. Something not meant to breathe air again. More people started reporting strange things. A hunter found his own footprints circling his blind, even though he'd never moved. A surveyor saw his reflection waving from inside a dry pond bed. Lights blinking from under the ridge at night like eyes opening and shutting. People laughed it off at first. Just stories, they said. Shadows. Maybe methane pockets making weird reflections. But folks stopped hiking in that area. And any mention of the ridge brought a heavy silence, like the whole room just held its breath for a beat too long. I went up there once, long time ago, back when I was still young and dumb and thought ghosts were for bedtime stories. I didn't go looking for anything. I was just passing through, taking photos of the old mesquite stands and fence lines. But the moment I stepped off the main road, it felt wrong. Like walking into a room where someone just died. The air got thick, not hot, just heavy, like it didn't want to move. My boots kept sinking slightly, even though the ground looked dry. The birds stopped singing. Wind didn't blow. The trees made this creaking sound, soft, almost like they were whispering to each other. I turned back after 15 minutes. But that was enough. For the next few nights, I kept waking up at 3:33 a.m. sharp. Not to nightmares, just this feeling like something was watching me from the hallway. I checked every time, nothing there. On the fourth night, I heard whispering outside my window. No words I could understand, just a dry rasping, like someone sifting dust through their teeth. I moved to Austin after that. Haven't been back since. A few years ago, someone bought up the land around Black Ant Ridge. Some LLC out of Houston with no listed board members. Locals say they sent surveyors, but none of them stuck around long. One guy came into the diner 2 days after going up there. Wouldn't speak. Just sat in the corner booth staring at his hands until the waitress finally called someone to take him away. His fingernails were packed with dirt all the way down to the cuticle. Like he'd been clawing his way out of something. That land's still there. Still black and unmarked on maps. Nothing grows right on it. Compasses don't spin anymore, they just stop. Dead needles, like the earth itself gave up trying to point true. And here's the thing that gets me. There's a story about the last mining foreman, a man named Rowdy Kinley. He kept the only logbook. Wrote everything down. Ore levels, dynamite charges, shift schedules. The log ended on a Friday in 1911. Last entry read, found the hollow. The ground ain't solid no more. Boys say they hear breathing. After that, nothing. No more entries. No signatures. Just a smear of what looked like ink or maybe something darker across the page dot, so if you're ever driving near Black Ant Ridge and your GPS flickers or your map doesn't quite line up, don't stop. Don't get curious. Don't walk in for a closer look, because the ridge remembers. It watches. And once you step off the road, it doesn't matter how loud you scream or how long you claw at the soil dot, no one's going to find you. The ridge don't give you back. Not whole, anyway. They say Cypress Wayne was never on any map, not officially. Even before folks started whispering the name, that patch of forest south of Jasper had a way of sliding out of memory like a bad dream. The logging crews that came through in the 30s said their compasses jittered like they'd swallowed lightning bugs. Planes overhead showed nothing but a milky smudge, like someone took an eraser to the satellite image and rubbed too hard in one small circle. No grid lines, no trails, no heat signatures, and yet, back in 1944, there were residents. A dozen or so families, mostly timber workers and their kin. The official record says they left due to economic downturns, some fancy term stamped over with typewriter ink by a state clerk. But none of the families ever turned up anywhere else. No forwarding addresses, no burial records, not even a census update. They didn't leave, they vanished. My grandfather, Lester Kane, worked the power lines up near Toledo Bend back then. He used to say he passed by Cypress Wayne every 2 weeks, right up until the week it was gone, not destroyed, not burned, gone, like it had been pulled backward into the earth. He told my father once, late in life, that the trees looked wrong the last time he drove by, bent inward toward the center of the woods, like they were bowing to something. That's the word he used, bowing. Said the air was thick with the smell of iron and mildew, and the deeper in you looked, the darker it got, even at noon. He never went in, never slowed down again after that. Just passed by with his eyes forward and his jaw clenched tight. I wasn't even born then, not until '82, but I heard enough over the years to know when something wasn't just old man talk. My father inherited the land next to Cypress Wayne, 50 acres of longleaf pine and a dried-up creek bed that only ran in spring. I took over in my 20s, moved back from Houston when my wife got pregnant. We figured the quiet would be good for the baby, and the land was paid off. No neighbors for miles. Just trees and wind and the occasional fox nosing around the porch. We didn't know Cypress Wayne had started stretching again. It started with the silence. Our wind chimes quit ringing one night. Not just because there was no wind. There was. You could see the trees shivering, but the chimes hung limp, like they'd grown heavy. My daughter, May, was 2 by then. She pointed out the window and said, "She, the woods are listening." I told her not to talk nonsense, kissed her forehead, and tucked her in. But her words stuck with me, like burrs in a sock. The next day, I walked the perimeter, shotgun slung over my shoulder just in case a cougar had wandered close. That's when I noticed the trees leaning. Not all of them, just a line of pines facing one direction toward the old boundary fence, the one nobody had touched since the 40s, and past that, the air shimmered like it was caught in a heat mirage. Though the day was cold enough to nip the tips of my ears, the ground felt softer too, like stepping on old sponge cake. Each footfall sank an inch deeper than it should have. When I pressed my palm against one of those leaning trees, it was warm. Too warm. That night, May cried in her sleep. My wife, Lena, found her curled up at the foot of her bed with a nosebleed. Said she dreamed of the lady in the wet dress who stood at the tree line and called her name. I tried brushing it off. Kids see things. But when I asked May what the lady looked like, she said, "Her skin's like tree bark and her mouth is open too big." Then she reached up and pulled her mouth wide with her fingers until it looked painful. That wasn't imagination. That was memory. I went to the county office the next day to see what they had on Cypress Wayne. The clerk was a guy named Morgan, about 60, with hair like dried wheat and nicotine fingers. When I mentioned the forest by name, his eyes didn't even flicker. He just slid a thick binder across the desk and said, "Don't take it home. Read it here." The binder was filled with old notes, yellowed reports, and a few blurry photographs mostly. Of trees, oddly angled, and one where the middle of the image was just pure white. Burned out. One photo showed a house with no door. Just a black opening where the wood had curled away like petals. The last page had a handwritten line. "The forest reclaims what was promised." When I asked Morgan what that meant, he closed the binder. They never left. The people. They're still in there. Screaming maybe, or growing. Then he scratched at his neck and muttered, "Don't go past your fence line, Kane." But I did. 2 nights later, I heard whispering. Not loud, low, insistent. Like a voice muffled by a wall of moss. May was crying again. Lena swore she saw someone outside the kitchen window, staring in. I grabbed the flashlight and the shotgun, marched straight into the woods past the fence. It was like stepping into warm water. The temperature jumped 20 degrees. The trees groaned like they were breathing. The whispering grew louder, and now it was saying my name. Eli. Ely. I swept the flashlight side to side and caught movement. Not animals. Not people either. Shapes. Limbs where limbs shouldn't be. Faces half formed in the bark. Eyes too many and mouths too wide, just like May said. One shape stepped into view, a woman, her dress clinging wet to her frame, her hair stuck to her cheeks like drowned weeds. She didn't blink. She opened her arms and said, "Come see what your blood remembers." Behind her, the forest pulsed. Like a living thing, I ran. I swear I did. But my legs wouldn't move right, and the ground sucked at my feet. Every step felt like wading through syrup. When I broke back through the fence line, I collapsed on the grass and didn't wake up until morning. Lena packed May and left that day. I didn't argue. I told her I'd follow. I lied. I've stayed. Not because I want to. Because I can't seem to leave. Every road out ends in a loop. The GPS spins and resets. When I tried to call anyone, The phone buzzes in my hand like it's alive. The trees are closer now. Every week, they lean in more. At night, I hear knocks against the walls, soft at first, like fingertips, then harder. Something brushes my bedroom window around 2:30 every night. Without fail, sometimes I dream of the town that used to be here. Little wooden homes swallowed by moss. People walking, but their feet don't touch the ground. I see them with open mouths and hollow eyes. They look at me and whisper, "You came back. You're the last piece." I don't know what that means, but the name Cypress Wayne keeps echoing in my skull like a hymn. This morning, the wind didn't blow. The chimes hung dead. I stepped outside and saw something new. A road. Pale gravel, curling through the trees where no road had been before. It shimmered under the sun, bone white and waiting. The trees bent along its edge, guiding the way. I think I'm going to follow it. I think I don't have a choice anymore. If you find this note, don't come looking. Don't bring help. Don't step past the fence line. The forest doesn't forget. And it doesn't like to be left alone. They called it Needle Fork because the old survey maps had two shallow creeks splitting off in opposite directions near a bend of scorched farmland, like a crude drawing of a fork with barbed tines. Most folks just passed it by, the name fading from road signs and memory alike. But for those who lived within 100 miles of the place ranchers, game wardens, wildcatters, there was a soft-spoken understanding to leave it alone. Not because it was cursed or sacred or even legally off limits, but because it was wrong. Not evil, necessarily, just wrong. And that kind of quiet, simmering wrongness lingers longer than horror stories ever could. It started creeping back into the headlines in 2017, when a Texas Parks and Wildlife unit went missing while tracking a wounded mountain lion. Their GPS cut out a few minutes after they reported reaching the edge of the perimeter fence near the Needle Fork tracks. The static on their radios was sharp and screechy like wind over razor wire. Search parties combed through scrubland for weeks, but all they found was the unit's truck, still idling with both doors flung wide and a set of binoculars melted slightly along the lens rim, as if something hot had brushed it. Not burned, just softened. Like wax near a flame dot by the time I came sniffing around the area in 2021. Needle Fork had become a thing whispered about on prepper forums, paranormal subreddits, and field recordist groups. I'd been tracking strange signal interruptions across West Texas for a documentary. I never finished too much interference. Too many close calls, and one too many nights where my memory came up short by hours with no footage to show for it. But Needle Fork had something the others didn't. Its silence wasn't empty. It ate noise. Like the whole region had been scrubbed with bleach, not just physically, but sonically. People tried recording near the fences and ended up with files of absolute zero, not even a floor hum. Just black, unbroken silence. Something about that fascinated me more than it scared me. At first, the drive out from Fort Stockton took me through dry gulches, past pump jacks bowing slowly like mechanical monks, and down a rutted access road littered with glassy bits of sun-baked beetle shells. The fence started without warning, rusted barbed wire sagging between iron posts, some bent in odd angles as if pushed from within. Every few yards, a crooked nitrogen monoxide trespassing sign dangled in the windless heat. I parked near a crumbling water tower with Needle Fork spray-painted across the tank in cracked white letters. There was no gate, just a break in the wire and a narrow trail leading inside. That trail wasn't on my topo maps. I followed it anyway. The moment I crossed into the enclosed area, my skin prickled like it was brushing against low-frequency power lines. Every hair stood straight up, my ears ringing with a faint echo of what sounded like wind, but not wind. It had a pulse to it, not mechanical, not natural, but steady. like breath held too long. I pulled out my portable recorder, clipped it to my backpack strap, and whispered a few notes into the mic. Later, when I checked the file, it would be blank. No whisper, no wind, not even static. The landscape inside was familiar but twisted like the surrounding prairie, but wrong in small ways. The scrub brush was too brittle, their leaves pale as ash. Cacti leaned away from the trail. The ground had a strange give to it, like walking on a mattress that had dried out in the sun. I found bones about 20 minutes in. They were arranged in a shape, though not one I recognized, a rough spiral of vertebrae and femurs from deer, coyotes, maybe a cow. But the marrow had been sucked clean, no gnaw marks, no weathering, fresh but untouched by predators. That's when I noticed the noise again, or rather, the lack of it. No bugs, no bird calls. Just that awful pressure in the air, like a storm had gathered in reverse. My radio crackled once, sharply. A burst of garbled sound, then silence. I checked my walkie and pressed transmit. Testing channel 4. Anyone in range respond. Nothing. Not even the hiss of dead air. I tried again, walked 20 feet further. The same. Then, faintly, something crackled back, not a voice, but what sounded like chewing. Wet, slow, repetitive. I froze. The air was too dry for that noise to exist here. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't static. It was something close. I spun around. Nothing in sight but mesquite trees and cracked stone. But when I turned back, the trail was gone, not hidden, not overgrown, gone. Behind me was a patch of dry earth with no indentations, no break in the brush. The wire fence was gone too, replaced by a tall line of pale wooden posts that hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. They were carved with symbols, almost runes, but cruder. Not decorative, more like warnings. Some of the carvings looked new. Some looked ancient. I ran. I don't remember making the decision to run, I just remember my legs moving, breath catching in my throat, and the eerie sensation that the landscape was bending as I moved. Things shifted subtly, tree branches rotated slightly toward me as I passed, the ground sloped downward where it hadn't before. I stumbled and fell face first into a mound of old clothes, boots, jeans, faded work shirts, all half buried. In dirt but strangely intact. I recognized the TPW insignia on one of the shirts. I scrambled back. That's when I saw the ribcage poking from beneath a pair of cargo pants. It was wrapped in coils of something that looked like wire but felt organic, smooth, slick, and warm. I didn't touch it twice. The air shimmered like heat haze, and then the chewing came again, louder now, all around me. Something was in the trees, not stalking. Just waiting. I fumbled for my camera, hit record, and panned in a slow circle. Nothing, but I heard movement behind me. Crunch, crunch. A heavy footstep, not animal, not quite human either. I turned slowly and saw the silhouette. It stood among the posts, almost blending into them. Tall, slender, the limbs too long. The arms ending not in hands but branches, barbed and dry, trembling slightly in the wind that had returned all at once. Its head looked like a sack of skin stretched too tightly over something antlered. When it moved, the chewing stopped. I ran again, but each turn brought me back to the spiral of bones. The exact same arrangement, no matter which direction I took. Time slipped strangely. The sun was no longer above me but crouched low on the horizon, though I hadn't been there more than an hour. My feet bled from thorns I hadn't seen. My voice cracked shouting for help, but nothing came back. Not even echo. Eventually, I blacked out. When I woke, I was outside the fence, lying in the dirt next to my truck, engine still cold. Recorder. Missing. Camera fried. The SD card was warped like it had been microwaved. I left and never went back. but I've tracked the stories. People still disappear near Needle Fork. Hikers, hunters, drone pilots. There's a radius about a mile wide where GPS fails and radio squeal and the ground goes soft underfoot. The barbed wire fence is still. They're freshly patched every time someone cuts it. No one knows who does the repairs. Some say it's military. Others say it's local families protecting something old, something primal. But I know better now. Needle Fork doesn't keep things out. It keeps something in. And every once in a while, when the wind shifts and the silence grows too loud, it lets a little of itself leak past the fence line. Just enough to remind us what waits in the forgotten corners of the map. Just enough to make sure we never forget to fear the static and the chewing and the spiral of bones waiting just out of sight. Keller's Gap doesn't show up on most maps anymore, and the ones that still print it get the coordinates just a little wrong. Not by much, maybe a quarter mile off. Just enough that if you go looking for it, you'll miss the turn without realizing you missed anything at all. It's not marked, not fenced. The old road crumbles into gravel within the trees, vanishing like it never belonged there to begin with. But for about 5 years, between late 41 and mid 46, Keller's Gap was a living, breathing boomtown carved into the limestone heart of central Texas. They built it vast rows of prefab houses, a military rail spur, bunkers and sheds and mess halls, all tucked into a shallow basin nestled between two broad hills. They say it was built to process munitions, but no official paperwork about its purpose survived past 47. A few newspaper clippings, mostly celebratory, paint a picture of patriotic optimism, young workers flooding in, full of energy, helping the war effort from the safety of the home front. There's one grainy black and white photo of a 4th of July parade running down the center of town. Kids holding flags, women on floats waving, a marching band frozen mid-step in front of a banner that reads, Keller's Gap, proud to serve. But then, nothing. By the time the war ended, the town had already emptied. Not declined, emptied. No forwarding addresses, no relocation orders, just a slow bleed of people until the place was hollow. Then it stopped showing up on property records. The rail line was pulled. The road went wild. And those two hills, the ones that flanked the gap itself, started to get a reputation. Never would have thought to go looking for it. Not really. If it hadn't been for my Uncle Wes, he brought it up one summer during a 4th of July cookout. After a few beers, when the fireworks had made everyone nostalgic. Wes had served in Vietnam, came home with a limp and a haunted look he never fully lost. He wasn't the kind to tell ghost stories, but that night, staring at the fire, he said, "Real low. You ever hear about Keller's Gap?" We were sitting behind my aunt's house in Lampasas, maybe 40 miles from where the town would have been. I told him no, I hadn't. He didn't say much more, only that the hills didn't like people poking around there. Said they shifted. Sometimes not like an earthquake, but like they'd turn you around without you knowing it. Make a ridge where a valley should have been, block the sky just long enough for you to lose your way. He told me one of his buddies in the reserves had gone looking for it in the 70s and came back 2 days later barefoot, sunburnt and sobbing. The man never said what he saw. Never went camping again. I didn't bring it up again until years later. I'd been researching Texas ghost towns for a book idea I never ended up finishing. Keller's Gap kept coming back up, not directly, but in whispers. Old-timers mentioning it under their breath. A photo here or there, all dated to around 44, all slightly blurred. Not out of focus, just off. Like the light didn't behave the same in that part of the hills. So I decided to find it. I drove out with a topo map, a GPS tracker, and a satellite image printed off Google Earth. I parked where the county road narrowed and turned to gravel, and I hiked the rest of the way. The trees were dense but familiar at first live oak, mesquite, clusters of cedar. The ground was dry and cracked in places, baked by a week-long stretch of summer heat. Cicadas screamed overhead. I must have walked for an hour before I noticed the trail I'd been following had disappeared. I don't mean it faded out, I mean it was gone. One moment there were boot prints and old tire ruts baked into the soil, and the next I was standing in a patch of flat, reddish stone that looked like it hadn't been walked on in decades. No wind, no birds. Even the cicadas had gone quiet. I checked my GPS. The screen was frozen, blinking, then it rebooted itself and gave a flat battery icon. My phone, which had been fully charged, was already at 8% and dropping fast. I didn't panic, not then. I marked a rock with chalk, drew an arrow, and pressed on. I started to find things. A rusted coil of wire sticking up from the dirt. A length of old railroad track embedded in a gully. A water spigot with no pipe attached, just driven into the soil. And then I crested a low hill and saw the basin dot. It looked like someone had tried to erase it. That's the only way I can describe it. The buildings were still there, kind of, but not whole. They slumped like mud brick ruins, sagging under their own weight, black mold crawling up the walls, even though the place had been bone dry for decades. A row of small homes, each one with its windows busted out and its doors hanging loose. The ground around them was uneven, almost like it had been raked by giant fingers. No grass, just patches of chalky white powder that I thought was ash until I knelt down and realized it was some kind of desiccated lichen. It broke apart like moth. Winged out, I took pictures, or tried to. My camera refused to power on. My phone died for good when I opened the lens. The air felt thicker now, like walking through water. Each step echoed wrong, like the ground was hollow. I saw what looked like a playground swing hanging from a twisted length of metal that might have once been a frame. It swayed slowly, but there was no wind. I heard footsteps that stopped me cold. I was alone, miles from the road, and I hadn't seen another soul all day. The steps weren't close, but they weren't distant either, soft, like someone walking barefoot across dust. They circled. They never got nearer. But every time I turned my head, they'd pause, then start again from another direction. I called. Out. Nothing answered. I backed into one of the old houses. The air inside was ice cold. Not air-conditioned cold, deep cave cold. The smell was metallic and sour. I reached for the flashlight clipped to my belt, turned it on, and the beam hit something on the far wall. Names. Hundreds of names. Carved into the sheetrock, the wood panels, the floorboards. Some big and deliberate. Some tiny, like fingernail. Scratches. Some were just first names, others full. Some dated, others not. But the most disturbing ones were the ones that had dates from after the town was supposedly abandoned. 52, 67. One that read, Elaine Martin, 1984. Please help. I turned and ran. I didn't stop to mark my trail. I didn't try to photograph anything. I just moved, following the path I thought I'd come in on. But the hills weren't right. The trail twisted in ways I didn't remember. The ridgelines shifted. One moment the sun was behind me. The next it was in my eyes. I passed the same pile of rusted cans 3 times, though I never turned a full circle. I began to hear voices. Not words, just murmurs, too faint to place. Like a radio buried under 10 feet of earth, picking up a signal it couldn't quite translate. I stopped trying to fight the land and just ran in one direction, any direction. Eventually I hit a fence, a new one chain link, 10 feet high, with signs posted every few feet. Do not enter. U.S. government property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. The metal was warm, humming faintly. My hand stuck to it when I tried to climb, like the mesh was tacky with resin. I made it back to the car by dusk, though I couldn't tell you how. I drove until I saw another vehicle, then pulled over and sobbed behind the wheel for half an hour. The GPS still didn't work. My phone wouldn't even take a charge until the next morning. When it came back online, there were no pictures. Not even the ones I'd taken earlier that day. My chalk marks were gone. I haven't told many people. But I went back once more, a year later, just to be sure I hadn't imagined it all. There's no basin anymore. No sunken ground. The hills roll smooth and even. No sign of town was ever there, but one of those warning signs? It was half buried. Under cedar needles by the side of the road, bent, rusted, and on the back, scratched in as small as a whisper, were the words, "The Hills Remember." They say if you're flying low enough over East Texas in the early morning light, you can catch a glimpse of it. A sprawl of weathered buildings nestled into the red bluffs east of Sabine County, half obscured by the cliff face and carved so precisely into the rock that it almost seems natural. The pilot who first spotted it back in 1973 was just a crop duster named Jerry Lowry, flying out of Center, Texas. Jerry said it looked like a whole town folded into the cliffside rows of dwellings. A chapel, a small water tower clinging to the bluff like a tick. He saw it once, then never again. Even when he flew the exact same route days later, even when he dropped his altitude dangerously low. Ashcombe Bluffs. That's what the locals started calling it, though the place never existed on any geological map or land survey. No roads led to it. No trails. And when hikers tried to trace the coordinates, Jerry jotted down on a gum wrapper. They either found solid rock or wandered off the trail and came back days later confused, dehydrated, and sometimes different. The kind of different where their wives said they talked in their sleep in voices that weren't theirs, or they'd sit for hours outside in the dark just staring at the trees, whispering like they were waiting on something to arrive. My brother Evan was one of those people obsessed with Ashcombe. It started small, he was just curious, like we all were back in college. We'd read old forum threads and dig through archived newspaper clippings on Jerry Lowry's original report, try to cross-reference them with topographical data. But for me, it stayed a curiosity, a spooky bit of Texas folklore. For Evan, it became something else. A calling, maybe. He said there were symbols patterns in the rock formations that didn't make sense. Geological anomalies that looked like they'd been carved with tools, not time. Spiral indentations that matched no natural erosion, and sometimes, when he turned the gain up on his field recorder at night, he'd hear what sounded like singing. Not close, but far off and layered, like it was trapped under stone. He started hiking out near the supposed site alone. Spent nights camped on the edge of the bluffs, just beneath the pines where the soil turned to brittle red clay. He kept journals, filled them with drawings, detailed renderings of stone doorways he claimed to see in his dreams. Always the same scale and orientation. He stopped answering calls. Even Mom couldn't get through to him near the end. Then last March he didn't come back. I drove in from Dallas the second I got the news. Search and rescue found his tent, perfectly intact, pitched on the overlook. Inside were his journals, all 12 of them, stacked neatly on the sleeping bag like someone had laid them out on purpose. The fire pit was cold, but the coals were fresh enough that they'd been burning the day before. There was no sign of struggle, no drag marks, no indication he'd fallen. Just his boots sitting outside the tent entrance. But here's the thing. That stayed with me. Etched into the rock just a few feet from where he'd camped was a spiral 4 inches wide, carved so cleanly into the bluff it looked machine cut. I touched it. The stone around it was warm, not from sunlight. The sun hadn't hit that side of the bluff yet. It was like the spiral held heat from somewhere else. The police report was inconclusive. They listed Evan as missing, presumed dead. Probably fell, they said. But he was an experienced climber. He wouldn't have fallen. Not there. Not like that. Weeks passed. I tried to move on. Tried to tell myself he just vanished like 1,000 others do each year. Texas is vast. People disappear in its folds like change between cushions. But then the journals started whispering. I know how that sounds. I do. But I swear on everything that's real and holy, I'd leave one on the kitchen counter, come back to find it open. Always to the same page. Always to the spiral. And at night, I'd hear something soft from the living room. Not a voice exactly, but something like syllables repeated under breath. Like Evan was still trying to get through, still scribbling from somewhere just out of reach. So I did what anyone left behind does. I followed the breadcrumbs. I went out to the bluff. I brought his journals. I pitched my tent exactly where he had. I stayed for 3 nights. The first night was quiet, except for the wind and the whip-poor wills. The second, I found a stone. In my boot that hadn't been there before, chalk white, warm to the touch. I dropped it, and it rolled uphill. By the third night, I began to hear the singing. It started after midnight. Faint. Harmonic. Not English, not Latin, but not noise either. It followed a rhythm rising and falling in waves, like an echo trying to claw its way out of deep water. I unzipped the tent. The spiral was glowing, not brightly. Just a faint red shimmer like embers under the surface. I moved toward it, drawn, heart thudding like a drumline in my throat. And then I saw the path. Wasn't there before. It ran along the cliffside, descending at an impossible angle into a cleft I hadn't noticed. It wasn't on any map. Wasn't on any satellite image I pulled up later. But that night, it was real. I followed it. The descent was steep. The walls pressed close. I should have needed a rope, but I didn't. The footing was sure, as though something beneath was guiding me, holding me upright. The air grew warmer, thicker, like the inside of lungs. I descended for what felt like an hour, maybe more. Then I reached the threshold. Ashcombe Bluffs was real. Not ruins, not remnants, but whole, carved perfectly into the red stone. A settlement clung to the cliff like it had been born there. The buildings had no doors, only openings tall and narrow like wounds in the rock. The windows weren't glass but black voids that didn't reflect light. And the singing, it was coming from every direction, yet nowhere at all. I stepped forward. Something shifted. They came out of the buildings then. Not people. Not quite. They looked like people at first. Like shadows cut from the stone, draped in the same red clay robes. Eyes that gleamed faintly gold like candlelight reflected in water. Mouths that didn't move, yet the song never stopped. They watched me. Dozens of them, standing still, arms at their sides. Then one stepped forward. It held a book. Leather-bound, worn, familiar. Evan's journal. I reached for it. And the second I touched it, the bluff screamed. Not the people. Not the figures. The stone itself. A low, endless groan that split the air like tectonic grief. My vision blurred. My ears bled. The path behind me twisted, reversed, folded in on itself like paper soaked in oil. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the overlook. The spiral had cooled. The stars had shifted. My tent was gone. When I finally found my truck, it was covered in pine needles. The windshield cracked from dry rot. The gas had evaporated. My phone was dead. I walked 12 miles to the ranger station. They told me I'd been missing for 4 weeks. I don't know what Ashcombe Bluffs is. A town trapped between time. A memory carved into earth's marrow. A wound in the world that sings to the lost. But it's real. And it's hungry. Evan's journal sits beside me now. The last page has something new. Not his handwriting. It says simply, "Bring another." They said Chaff Hollow had a hum to it. Not something you could hear with your ears, not exactly. More like a vibration you felt in your chest once you crossed a certain invisible line. The kind of thing that made your fillings itch, made the fillings itch. Hairs on your arms stand straight up. I never believed in all that compasses spinning, roads rotting, time looping over itself like a stuck cassette. Until I saw it for myself. I'd been working with the Department of Transportation out of Waco for 10 years, surveying rural infrastructure and filing reports that no one really read. Most of the time, the job was dull. Cracked blacktop, washed out culverts, the usual grind. Then came a folder dropped on my desk with a post-it note that said simply, "Unknown anomaly. Investigate." It was stamped with a routing code 1. Didn't recognize. The attached coordinates led to a patch of back road east of Buffalo Gap, where the map showed nothing but great terrain, no roads, no homes, no infrastructure at all. Yet, according to the file, there'd once been a small service route called Chaff Hollow Road, paved in the 1950s and supposedly decommissioned sometime in the mid-70s. Problem was, there were no records of that decommissioning. No county signatures, no construction photos, not even a damn receipt for the paving. Like it had been forgotten on purpose. I headed out alone one Monday morning, thinking it would be a quick look, a couple of photos, maybe a report about overgrown brush and illegal dumping, and I'd be back home by dinner. I should have known better. There's a kind of silence you only hear in places the world forgot. It presses on you like a weight. That's what hit me as I turned off the main county road and followed the GPS into a patch of unmarked land where a narrow strip of faded asphalt curved between walls of oak and cedar, half eaten by vines. The sun had gone behind clouds thick as boiled wool, and the air had that smell you only get before a thunderstorm, ozone and rot. I stopped my truck, where the gravel ended and the forest swallowed the road. My compass spun slow circles on the dash, clicking softly like it had a pulse. I stepped out and felt it then, that hum. Subtle but steady, like the thrum of an old generator buried deep underground. I chalked it up to nerves and started walking. Snapping photos and muttering field notes into my recorder. It didn't take long to realize something was wrong with the road. The asphalt didn't look just old, it looked dead. No cracks or potholes, just patches where the pavement had liquefied and hardened again in strange, bubbled patterns. Almost like it had boiled. Moss grew in geometric lines along the shoulders, in perfect symmetry. And the deeper I went, the more the forest changed around me. Trees leaned in ways that defied gravity, their trunks bending as if they were reaching toward something, not the sun, but something deeper. Something in the ground. I must have walked a mile when I noticed the stillness. No birdsong, no wind, no insects. Just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of my boots on gravel that didn't seem to match the forest. That's when I realized the trees weren't the same ones I'd passed before. There was a split oak I'd taken a picture of earlier. A dark burn down its center like a lightning strike scar. I passed it again. Same split, same burn, same angle. I stopped cold. I wasn't going in circles. I was going straight. But the landscape was folding over itself. I tried turning back. Walked for what felt like 15-20 minutes. Passed the same split oak a third time. That's when I panicked. I pulled out my GPS. It showed me standing still even as I moved. The time on my watch had stopped 12:47 p.m. and wouldn't budge no matter how long I waited. I thought I'd imagined the whisper at first. Just the wind, maybe, or my own mind playing tricks. But then it came again, clearer, sliding between the trees in a low rasp that didn't sound quite human. A voice speaking my name. Not shouting, calling, I turned and saw nothing but shadow and bark. I ran. My boots skidded across the warped pavement, lungs burning, heart pounding so loud I could barely think. The forest thickened around me, narrowing the road until it was little more than a footpath. I didn't stop until I saw the truck again, parked just as I'd left it, doors slightly ajar, keys still in the ignition. The only problem was there were two of them. Same truck, same color, same tags. One parked neatly, dust on the hood and a fast food wrapper on the dash. The other looked like it had been there for years, rust blooming across the body, windshield spiderwebbed with cracks, tires sunken into the earth. I staggered backward, unsure which was real. The hum grew louder. The air thickened. That's when I saw myself. Not a mirror, not a trick of the light me. Standing just a few feet away, wearing the same clothes, same boots, same confused expression. He looked at me like I was the intruder. Then his mouth opened and he said, "Don't pick either." The other me turned and disappeared into the woods, swallowed by the trees without making a sound. I followed him. Of course I did. What else was I supposed to do? The trees shifted as I moved. Paths blinked in and out of existence. I followed. Footprints that matched my own, looping through gullies and hollows where the sunlight never quite reached. I passed places that felt familiar but looked different, like someone had rebuilt the world from memory but missed the details. A barn that had no doors, a mailbox with no house, a swing set hanging from nothing. Time bled sideways. Hunger gnawed at me, but I never felt weak. Thirst burned my throat, but there was no water. And still, always, the whisper followed. Not angry, not urgent, just insistent. I don't know how long I wandered. Hours, days? My beard grew out, then vanished. My watch restarted, then reversed. I saw night come and go without any stars. I saw a version of myself screaming beneath a dead tree, wrists torn open, mouth full of dirt. Eventually, I stopped looking for a way out. I just walked. That's when I saw the town. It wasn't marked on any map. No signs, no lights, just a scatter of buildings sagging in the woods like they'd grown there. Chaff Hollow. I knew it without being told. The place had the look of something abandoned before it was finished. Doors opened to staircases that ended in ceilings. Windows looked out onto brick walls. A church steeple stood alone, no sanctuary. Beneath it, there were people too, or things that looked like people. They moved in slow, jerky motions, like they weren't used to having bodies. Some wandered with their arms folded tight, others just stared into the sky like they were waiting for instructions. None of them spoke. None of them looked at me. Except one. A girl stood in the doorway of the church steeple. Her hair hung wet across her face, her dress shredded like she'd crawled through brambles. When she looked at me, the hum stopped. The world held its breath. She opened her mouth, and what came out wasn't words. It was a sound like metal scraping bone, like a radio tuned to the wrong frequency. I dropped to my knees, ears bleeding, vision warping into double. She pointed behind me, and I turned. The road had returned. The same rotted blacktop, but this time it pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. I don't remember walking. I just remember waking in my truck, sun pouring through the windshield, radio playing. A song I didn't recognize. My clothes were damp, my recorder gone. But I was alive. The time on the dash read 12:47 p.m. That was 3 months ago. Every night since, I've heard the hum in my walls. I've found dirt in my boots I can't explain. Sometimes I dream of the girl. She mouths a warning I can't understand. And sometimes, only sometimes, I see roads on maps that shouldn't be there. They always lead to Chaff Hollow. And I think, next time, I won't come back. They say the fire that scorched the rim of Dry Ember in 1911 was so hot, it left the rocks blistered and glassy. No lightning strike started it, no campfire ember, no drunk ranch hand with a careless match. It came from nowhere, rolled down the canyon like it had a mind of its own, and when it left, it took everything with it. Trees, homes, livestock, people. All of it gone in a single red afternoon. What it left behind was a bald scar of land 5 miles wide and steep as hell on all sides. You can see it from the overlook off Route 7, a bowl of dead earth like the earth tried to forget something but couldn't quite bury it. Folks say nothing grows there. Nothing ever has since the blaze, not even weeds. But sometimes, if you stop your car and look long enough, you'll see smoke curling up from the canyon floor like something still smoldering. Even though there's not a damn thing left to burn out, my Uncle Hank used to talk about Dry Ember when he drank. He'd sit out on his porch in Merkel with a bottle of early times and point southward like he could see through the mesquite and shale. Said he and his brother, my dad, hiked down into it once, back in '63. I didn't believe him at first, thought it was just the whiskey talking, but he wasn't the kind of drunk who made things up. He was the kind who remembered too much. He told me they followed an old game trail down through the burnt rim, though he said the trail wasn't right. Said it looked carved, like someone had dragged a hot poker through the stone itself. They went down in the morning, and by afternoon, they couldn't find their way out. The way up had vanished behind them. Trees that weren't there before now stood crooked and black, casting long shadows. The sun felt stuck, he said, like it hovered above the rim but never moved. And the deeper they went, the more they started to see things. He never told me exactly what. Just that it wasn't animals, and it wasn't people either. I didn't go looking for Dry Ember until after my father passed in '96. Found a map in his old army footlocker with a circle drawn in red grease pencil. No words, no notes. Just that circle out past Hawthorne Ridge. I remembered the stories then. My uncle slurring about smoke rising where nothing should, about the smell of ash that clung to your clothes even days after you left. I should have let it be, should have. Taken it as some old West Texas ghost story. But there was something about that map that pulled at me, like it had been waiting, like it wanted me to see. I parked off the highway, where the shoulder gets soft and the brush grows waist-high. Took a pack, some water, and a compass that started acting funny before I was 100 yards in. The terrain was wrong. Too quiet. No bugs. No birds. The air smelled like something between iron and charcoal. My boots kicked up dust that hung in the stillness too long, like time moved slower here. Like the wind remembered how to blow everywhere. Else but forgot this place entirely. I found the rim by late morning. It rose sudden and steep, like the world had just dropped away into a pit. No trees around it. No grass, just baked rock and powdery soil, dry and red. The edge looked melted. I mean that literally, like the stone had once bubbled and run like wax before freezing again. I couldn't see the bottom, just haze and that strange shimmer that makes the air ripple. But what got me most was the smell smoke, faint and persistent, curling up from somewhere far below. I don't remember deciding to go down. I just found myself on a narrow path that wound into the canyon like a corkscrew. Every few minutes I'd glance back, and the rim would be farther than it should have been. The sky overhead dimmed. Not clouded, dimmed, like a filter had been pulled over the sun. The deeper I went, the less right it felt. My skin itched, my ears popped, and the pressure never let up. The compass needle spun slowly, not jittery like interference, but smooth and methodical like it was searching for something that wasn't there. The path underfoot grew hotter too. I stopped twice to check my boots, half expecting the solids to melt. But they held. So I kept going. I saw the first shape just before dusk, or what passed for dusk in that place. It stood still at the edge of a stone outcrop, looking down into the canyon like it was waiting for something. Not a person. Too tall. Too thin. It didn't turn. It didn't move. But I felt it register me, like a dog sniffing the air. And when I blinked, it was gone. My legs didn't want to move after that. I had to force them. The canyon floor looked like an old battlefield. Blackened stumps, scorched rock, no insects, no breeze. Just that constant, acrid smell of wood smoke without a fire. And the strange thing? There were no ashes, not one. Just the smell and that shimmer that rose off the ground like heat mirage. I came across a ruin of some kind about an hour later. Stone walls crumbled down to knee height, outlines of buildings that might have been houses or shops once. Nothing modern, all sunken, ancient, and wrong. There were signs people had tried to build something here generations ago, maybe longer, but it hadn't taken. The earth wouldn't let it. Everything was half swallowed by the dirt, like it. Had tried to rise but got pulled under again. That's when I started hearing the whispers, not words. Not in any language I know. Just sound like wind moving through dry brush. But there wasn't any wind. And the voices weren't coming from around me. They were coming from beneath. The ground wasn't solid. I could feel it, subtle tremors. Beneath my boots, like something moved deep down under the stone. And the air got hot, searing the back of my throat. My eyes burned. My tongue swelled. I tried to turn back, retrace my steps, but the trail was gone. I didn't panic. Not at first. Told myself I was turned around, that I missed a switchback. But every direction looked the same, just red rock, scorched soil, and that never ending. Haze, and above it all, the rim sat high and far, unmoving, unreachable. Then came the footsteps. Not mine. Heavy, deliberate, crunching across the brittle surface like boots on glass. I crouched behind one of the ruined walls, heart slamming. In my chest. I peeked over the edge and saw a figure moving between the rocks. Tall. Too tall. Limbs too long, head tilted like a broken marionette. It dragged something behind it. Something that thumped across the stone and left a dark smear dot. It didn't look human. But it wore something that had once been human clothing. A charred shirt. Strips of denim. One scorched boot dangling from a twisted foot. And its face, God help me, its face wasn't burned. It was blank. Like wax melted smooth and reformed with no features. But I swear it looked right at me. I ran then. No path. No compass. Just raw panic and blind movement. I scraped my hands. Tore my clothes, banged my knee hard enough to limp. But I didn't stop. Not until the ground began to rise again. I clawed upward, grabbing at loose rock, digging fingers into dry soil. The slope wasn't the same. Steeper, slicker. But something was behind me, and I didn't dare stop to see if it followed. When I broke over the rim, the sun was high again morning. My watch was dead. My canteen bone dry. The car looked farther than it should have been, but I staggered toward it, got in, and drove without thinking. Didn't stop until Sweetwater. When I looked in the mirror that night, my face was sunburned. But only the front. The back of my neck where the sun should have. Hit hardest was pale, clean, like I hadn't been out there at all. I never went back. I don't tell many people what I saw, but sometimes late at night I smell smoke through my bedroom window. Not cigarette smoke. Not wood smoke from a neighbor's fire pit. It's dry, bitter, ancient, and sometimes when the wind blows just right, I hear whispers under the floorboards. I moved 2 states away, bought land where the dirt's soft and the trees grow thick. But every so often, when I close my eyes, I see the canyon again. I see that blank face. And I remember what my uncle said before he passed. Words I didn't understand then but do now. Some fires never go out. They just wait for someone new to breathe. The panhandle's got places the maps don't argue about, just blank spaces where the dust never settles right. I heard about Hall's Keep for the first time at a truck stop outside Amarillo, way past midnight, over black coffee that tasted like burnt axle grease. Old man named Merritt told it. Real husky voice like a busted CB radio and eyes that never quite look straight at you. He said it like this: you ever run north past Dumas, find yourself lost after Viga, and see a rusted out signpost with no name turned back. That's Hall's Keep. Trucks go in. Pavement don't come back out. I laughed the way you do when someone's spinning a yarn, but he didn't crack a smile. He just looked down at his cup and muttered, "Last time I heard from my brother was a CB ping from there. Keeps call in," he said. That was 96. I chalked it up to highway legend. Long haulers got stories, and stories grow teeth in lonely places. But the name stuck in my head like a bad itch behind the eye, and 2 weeks later, curiosity did what it always does. It took the wheel. I drove a 26-foot box truck, mostly hotshot. Freight generators, construction gear, sometimes weird odd jobs from companies with no business card and cash in envelopes. This one came through a burner line, same voice I'd used before for backhauls. Said they had a container of industrial refrigeration coils that needed to be delivered to a holding facility just past Hereford near the old grain silos. Good payout, $1,200 for a 90-mile drop. All I had to do was deliver and forget. Should have known from the start. The coordinates didn't pull up a town. Just a blank spot on Google Earth, one road curling in like a crooked finger. No weather data, no cell towers, nothing. I figured maybe it was some new data center or oil rig going up hush-hush, so I took it. Greed always sounds like logic when it whispers soft enough. I left Amarillo at 5 a.m. sun rising slow and red like a blood clot behind thin clouds. The further I drove, the flatter it got. Fence posts grew fewer. Mailboxes rusted to nothing. Even the cows seemed to have wandered off. My GPS gave up around 6:10. The road beneath my tires turned from cracked asphalt to dirt, then to something in between hard-packed gravel that pulsed under the tires like it had a heartbeat. The sign came out of the ground like a scar. No words. Just a rectangle of faded steel, bent sideways and chewed by wind. Beyond it, the road dipped into a narrow valley framed by tall berms of earth that didn't seem natural. Like something pushed the ground up from beneath instead of being carved. By water dot, I crossed the sign and my radio flared static. No signal, just this low, whining hum like someone breathing too close to the mic. I reached for the CB, hoping to bounce a signal off a tower behind me, but all I got was key eep hauling. It was so faint I thought I imagined it. But the air in the cab shifted, heavier, harder to breathe. My rear view showed nothing behind me anymore, not even the road I'd come in on. Just dry dust curling up like steam. I slowed down, heart picking up a beat, telling myself I was overthinking. It was early. I hadn't slept. That was all. The road twisted once, then straightened out like a spine. Then I saw them trucks dozens of them, parked haphazardly, nose deep in dust. Old Macs, Peterbilts, newer box trucks, refrigerated trailers with logos half sanded off by wind. All of them empty. Windows blown out or rolled down, doors open on some. Others sealed tight like tombs. No people, no animals. Just the smell grease, mildew, sun-baked vinyl, and something older like wet rust and moldy paper. I stopped, put it in park, and stepped out. My boots sank into a layer of dust that felt soft, almost wet, like flesh. It didn't kick up like normal dirt. It clung. I looked around. Nothing moved. No wind. No birds. No insects. The kind of silence that doesn't. Just settle at strngles. There was a gate up ahead. Made of chain link, sagging in the middle, padlock hanging open. A faded sign above it, Halls Keep Logistics. The letters were hand-painted, uneven, some backward, like a kid had done it or someone had forgotten what letters were supposed to look like. Behind the gate sat a low, windowless building. Concrete, stained black at the base. Big roll-up door in front. No lights, just that smell stronger now. Metallic. Wet. I radioed dispatch out of instinct. Nothing. No tone. Not even a buzz. I don't know why I walked toward the door. I wish I could say it was bravery or obligation. But the truth is, it felt like something pushed me. Not physically. Not in the chest or shoulders. Just behind the eyes, like my thoughts. Weren't mine anymore. Or maybe they were being twisted. Bent like metal under heat. The roll-up door creaked open halfway with one good tug. Inside nothing moved. No forklifts. No people. No racks. Just crates. Hundreds of them. Wooden. Stacked to the ceiling. Some half open, filled with rebar, plastic wrap, broken radios, coils of copper wiring, dust-choked computer parts. The farther. And I went, the weirder it got. Old rotary phones, doll heads. A stack of VHS tapes labeled Do Not View. Rolls of blank film. A rusted-out meat hook bolted into the floor with dark stains that had soaked into the concrete like veins. When I heard the whisper again. Not in my ear this time. It came from inside the truck, my truck. I turned, saw the door slam shut behind me, even though there was no wind. The cab light flicked on by itself, then off, then on again. Like it was blinking in code, I ran back. The truck was still there, engine off, lights cold. But the freight door locked before was now open. Empty. The coils were gone. All that was inside was a single clipboard. On it, a manifest with my name printed at the top. No date, no destination, no cargo listed. Just a note scrawled at the bottom in jagged red ink. Welcome to the Keep. Now you haul for U.S. I got in, turned the ignition. Nothing. Battery fine. Fuel gauge full. Engine refused to catch. I stepped back out and saw that the other trucks, the ones parked before, had changed. They were all facing me now. Engines off, but headlights glowing faintly. One by one, their cabs began to light up. Dim yellow flickers in the dust. Doors opened. Something stepped out of each. Not people. Not exactly. They moved like they'd once been, but too slow. Joints bending wrong. Faces hidden in shadow. They stood silently, one hand raised like they were hailing a cab. The smell hit again, now thick and choking diesel, rot and something sharp, like ozone and old blood. I backed into the cab, locked the doors. The headlights dimmed, then shut off. I sat there for hours, maybe days. No clock worked. My phone was dead. Eventually, the CB came to life again, static. Then a voice. You're up. Then silence. My truck's engine started on its own. Gear shift clicked to drive. I didn't touch it. The wheel turned itself, slow and deliberate. We rolled. Forward, out of the yard. Back onto the same road I came in on. Except I wasn't in control. It drove me for miles. No towns. No signs, no sun. Just that thick gray sky and the humming of the tires. The GPS flickered back on once. Showed my location as unknown sector property of Keep. That's where I've been ever since. If you're hearing this on the CB, if you're out near the panhandle and see a sign that's not on the map, don't follow it. Turn around. Shut off your rig. Sleep it off, because once you haul for the Keep, you don't stop. Not until something else climbs in and takes your seat. And it will. Believe me. It will. The first time Clay heard the laughter, he thought it was just runoff trickling through the mangled creek beds. He'd pulled over not out of panic but of necessity. His Ford's front left tire had dipped into what used to be a culvert but now looked like a half-eaten bowl of brown soup, rocks jutting out like broken teeth. Dover Sink wasn't on the map anymore, not really. Old-timers in the county still said the name like it meant something, like a sigh they didn't want to explain. But Clay had grown up 3 towns over and never once heard anyone mention Dover Sink in his school books, in conversation, or even on those junky local ghost story shows. He'd taken this route only because the highway west of Henderson was washed out. A sheriff in a wide-brim hat had flagged him down and told him to detour through the back roads. "You'll hit a rough patch before Clear Ridge," the man had said, "but it'll carry you." Clay had taken that to mean the road was open. What the man didn't say, and Clay would chew on this later like a dog with a bone, was what would carry him. The road had disappeared behind him. Rain had fallen for nearly a week straight, and while most of East Texas was used to the floodplain's tantrums, this year was something different. The air smelled wrong, like sour loam and rust, even before he'd entered the stretch where trees pressed in like suspicious neighbors and the light turned a faint olive, as if sunlight itself had been diluted with creek water. He stepped out of the cab, boots sinking into mud with a thick slurp, and grabbed the flashlight from under his seat. The sounds came again, high-pitched, echoing giggles like kids playing hide-and-seek. But there were no houses here, no driveways, no mailboxes, just endless buckled asphalt overtaken by moss and creeping vines. He scanned the area with the flashlight, the beam cutting through misty dusk like a dull blade. Nothing but trees, mud, and an old drainage ditch filled with water, the color of dark tea. Then, from the corner of his eye, movement, a pale shape, darting between the trees, quick, small. He thought maybe it was a deer, a raccoon, something skittish, but then it laughed. It was the laughter that undid his stomach. Not joy, not surprise. It was invitation. It sounded like the way a kid laughs when they know you'll never catch them. He knew better than to follow it. Clay had worked with land surveyors before, knew about sinkholes, knew about disappearing ground, knew about the way the earth here didn't just hold water, it swallowed. Still, something pulled at him. The laughter was closer now, behind a wet veil of the trees. He walked forward slowly, flashlight shaking in his hand, boots dragging through muck that made every step a gamble. A faint rhythm, like skipping feet, pulsed under the surface through the solace of his boots. The mud trembled with a dot, and then he saw them little handprints in the wet clay. Dozens of them, some pressed deep, others as faint as breath. 2. Small for adults, way too small. They ran in circles, some trailing off into waterlogged woods, others ending abruptly as if their owners had vanished mid-chase. A single toy lay nestled at the center, an old rubber ball, half deflated, mottled with age, but somehow clean compared to the rot around it. He bent down instinctively, reaching for it, and the moment his fingers brushed the surface, the laughter. Stop-dot silence settled in like dust in an abandoned house. Not even frogs, not wind. Just that electric, unnatural stillness, like the air itself was waiting for something. Clay backed away slowly, pulse pounding in his ears. The ball rolled slightly, uphill, against gravity. He didn't wait to see what followed. He stumbled back to the truck, smearing mud across the side as he climbed in, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. The ignition clicked again. Dead. The headlights flickered once, enough to catch movement in the rear view, a line of children standing just at the tree line. Maybe 10 or 12 of them, barefoot, wearing what looked like Sunday clothes buried a century deep. Some had no eyes. Others had mouths too wide, as if they'd been cut and stretched to fit the laughter inside. None of them moved. Just watch Clay hit the horn. It gave a pitiful wheeze, waterlogged and useless. He tried the ignition again, and this time it caught. The engine stuttered like a dying man's breath, but held. He threw it in reverse, tires spinning in the mud until finally gripping something solid and lurching free of the sink. As he turned the wheel, headlights swept over the children. They were gone. He drove blind for miles, GPS still down, no signal, no service. It wasn't until morning that he reached the edge of Clear Ridge, his truck caked in mud, axles screeching with every turn. He stumbled into the gas station like a man crawling from the dead. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with nicotine fingers and an oxygen tank, looked up at him without blinking. "Come from the sink, didn't you?" she asked. Clay didn't respond. He couldn't. His throat felt packed with mud. She shook her head. They called to folks every flood year. Kids that. Drowned back in 21. Bus crash. Mudslide took the whole bridge. Ain't been no road since. Clay finally managed to whisper, "I saw them." The woman's eyes narrowed. "You're lucky you drove out." "Most don't. They hear laughing, they go looking." She paused, then added, "You didn't follow the sound, did you?" He didn't answer, just turned and walked back to the truck, leaving a trail of drying mud behind him. That night, in his motel off Route 94, the laughter came again. Faint, behind the thin walls, behind the mirror, behind his own teeth when he smiled without meaning to. Something had followed him. Or maybe something had never left. Days later, they found his truck halfway submerged off a fire road 10 miles. From Dover Sink, engine still warm, driver's seat empty, and in the mud nearby, a trail of tiny barefoot prints leading straight into the water, one of them holding a rubber ball. They used to call it Grackle Moor because the blackbirds never left. You drive through the marshy stretch north of Sabine Lake and see hundreds of them, like they were waiting for something. Perched on rusted telephone lines, balding fence posts, the warped railing of a collapsed bridge. And when you stopped your truck, even for a minute, they'd all go silent. Not fly away, not caw. Just watch. I used to think that was just Texas swamp weirdness. But I know better now that my Uncle Ray was the first one to tell me about Grackle Moor. I was 16 and helping him clean out his tool shed when he handed me a grimy oil can and said, "They built a whole damn town on sponge." I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. He was always saying cryptic stuff like that. But this time, he sat down on the old stump behind the shed and lit a cigarette. Then he started telling me about how his cousin married a girl from Grackle Moor back in the 70s. Said they had a church, a bait shop, even a barber shop with a chair made from a gutted gator. Population couldn't have been more than 200, but people passed through it on the way to Port Arthur. All the time, until one day in 81 the town just wasn't there. I didn't believe him, of course. Thought he was spinning one of his fishing tailies, but the look in his eyes was different, not wild or dramatic. Just flat, like he was recalling something he tried hard to forget. I left it alone then, but I didn't forget, years later after. Ray died of emphysema and left me his old F-100 and a crate of Vietnam medals. I found myself out that way again. I was working as a freelance surveyor for a contractor bidding on new floodplain levees. My job was to take elevation readings, check for signs of soft ground, verify access roads. When I saw Grackle Moor RD on the printout, I just about dropped my clipboard that it wasn't on Google Maps, not anymore. But it was on the old state file from 1976, a thin line, veering off the FM road, disappearing into the green smear of wetland. I was supposed to check coordinates for a potential pump station. The coordinates landed smack in the middle of where Grackle Moor used to be. That morning was foggy and cold, even for September. I loaded the truck, sloshed my way out past the cattails and live oaks, and hit the turnoff. The dirt path was almost completely overtaken by brush. I wouldn't have seen it at all if I hadn't stopped to piss and spotted an old wooden sign half swallowed by kudzu. Just 3 warped letters still visible. AC. I followed it in. The path narrowed, waterlogged and groaning beneath the tires like something alive was under it. Cypress trees lined the way, draped in Spanish moss that looked too heavy too. Dark. The sun hadn't broken through, and the fog thickened as I went deeper. I kept the window cracked, thinking fresh air might help with the headache starting to bloom behind my eyes. But the air smelled like pond scum and burnt oil. I passed a tree that had been split open like a wishbone. Blackbirds sat inside the hollow trunk, perfectly still, watching me go by. Not a single wing beat. Not a sound. My GPS gave out about 10 minutes in. The screen froze, then went gray. I tapped it. Nothing. I reached for my phone. No signal. Not even 1 bar. That was when I should have turned around, but I didn't. I drove on, slowly, eyes flicking from the overgrown path ahead to the weird reflections in the side mirrors. I thought I saw a gas station awning in the fog for a second, then it vanished. Another minute later, the path opened into what used to be a main street. I could tell by the layout. Ditches dug on either side, a set of uneven poles running down. The center like they'd once held power lines, and the way the ground felt beneath the tires. Not quite solid. Like I was floating on a raft of peat and rot. Then I saw the buildings. They weren't whole, not really. More like the husks of buildings. The top halves leaned at impossible angles, like someone had reached down and twisted them. One looked like it had been a diner, once curved glass panes shattered inward, aluminum roof warped like it had melted. Another might have been a church, but the steeple was embedded sideways in the muck, like it had been dropped from the sky. I stepped out of the truck and immediately regretted it. The ground wasn't dirt. It was soft, fibrous, and wet like stepping on soaked insulation. My boots sank an inch with every step. I grabbed the tripod and tried to set up the transit, but the legs wouldn't stay level. The deeper I pushed, the more the ground gave way, swallowing the metal like it wanted to eat it. I turned to head back to the truck and saw the first child. She stood between 2 collapsed sheds, barefoot, covered in streaks of greenish mud. Her eyes were wide and too dark, her dress torn like she'd crawled out of a grave. She wasn't crying or yelling, just staring. Then I heard giggling, not hers. Multiple voices. Dozens. It came from everywhere under the ground, from inside. The trees, behind the buildings. I stepped back, hard hammering, and tripped into something soft. It was a swing set. Or what was left of one. Rusted chains, the rubber seat torn in half. But it was swinging slowly, and the wind wasn't blowing. Ran to the truck. Tried to start it. The engine clicked once, then went dead. The lights blinked on, then off. The radio sputtered and spat out a voice, one word. Stay. I don't remember screaming. But I must have, because my throat burned. I slammed my fist into the dash, the horn went off, and the birds, hundreds of them, burst out of the trees like they'd been waiting for a cue. They didn't fly away. They circled, and circled, and circled. I threw open the door, crawled under the truck, and curled into myself like I did back in boot camp when the shells got too close. I must have passed out, because when I opened my eyes again, it was night. Dead. Black night. No stars. No moon. Just black sky and the sound of water dripping from somewhere it shouldn't have been dripping. I crawled out and found the town gone. No buildings. No swing set. No girl. No birds. Just the fog and a faint trail of boot prints mine, leading out into the nothing. The truck started this time. I didn't look back. I drove straight through the muck and fog, over fallen branches and half-buried road signs until I hit pavement. I don't remember the drive home. I don't remember the next 3 days. I do remember finding a string of black feathers in my kitchen sink that Friday, and a child's muddy handprint on my bathroom mirror. I moved 2 months later. Don't go near swamps anymore. Don't trust birds. Don't trust roads that disappear on the map. But every so often, I get a call from a surveyor I used to work with. They say their drone footage corrupted, or their boots vanished from the cab overnight, or they swear they saw an old bait shop in a foggy clearing just for a second before it sank. I never say much. Just this. If you ever see a blackbird watching you from a power line near Sabine Lake, don't stop. Don't get out. And whatever you do, don't listen for the children. Because if you hear them laughing, it's already too late. Gracklemore doesn't want to be found. It wants to find you. Ironvale sits deep in a stretch of parched Texas flatland where even the mesquite trees look like they're regretting their decision to grow. There's one road in cracked blacktop stitched with weeds and tire ruts that leads 23 miles off Route 90 before ending in a rusted metal gate chained shut. Past that, it's all dried mud, brittle fences, and the skeletons of what was supposed to be a correctional complex. The place was abandoned mid-construction in the late 70s after the state pulled funding. They said it was politics. The truth is nobody ever came back out right. Not all of them. Anyway, my Uncle Roy was one of the last contractors to leave Ironvale. He didn't talk about it much, except when he was drunk enough to shake. Said the walls already felt like a cell. Said you could hear footsteps echoing from wings that hadn't been built. He left his gear behind, drills, wrenches, his canvas, belt full of tools. Said it wasn't worth the drive back. When I got laid off last winter from the plant in Odessa, I remembered that old story and thought maybe there was something worth salvaging out there. Copper wire, pipes, steel panels, scrap prices were high. So I threw a couple crowbars and bolt cutters in the back of my Silverado and headed out that way just before dawn. I didn't tell my wife, just left a note on the counter. I figured I'd be back by sundown, richer by a few hundred if I played it smart. But that was before I found out Ironvale doesn't just sit empty. It watches. The gate was still there, same length of chain looped twice through the grates, padlock rusted shut. I could have turned back. Should have. Instead, I snipped it with bolt cutters and drove through. The gravel path past the gate had mostly been swallowed up by sand and scrub. I had to slow the truck to a crawl to avoid busting a tire. The main building finally appeared around a bend, an enormous slab of weather-beaten concrete, half done and crumbling, with iron bars welded to empty window frames like the building was trying to keep something in, not out. Sunlight glinted off broken glass littering the floor inside the front lobby. I parked near what used to be a loading dock and shut the engine off. The silence that followed was so thick, my ears rang. I walked around with a flashlight and a pry bar, checking for anything valuable. The air smelled like old ash and rusted nails. Wind moaned through the broken ductwork overhead, but it didn't sound like wind. More like a whisper trailing off just before you can make out the words. I kept telling myself it was just the acoustics, just the hollowness of a space never meant to be alive. Still, I stayed near the entrance, never venturing deeper than a few rooms. That changed when I found the security station. It was a small steel booth bolted near the east wing, with panels of cracked glass and an old control board still wired up. I was halfway through prying a copper junction box loose when the light overhead flickered to life. I hadn't touched the circuit yet. No generator, no power line running in. But the overhead fluorescents blinked on, one by one, bathing the city hallway in a sickly yellow light. I froze, every hair on my arm standing straight. Then I heard a buzz and electric hum rising from the panel like it was waking up. A red light blinked next to the intercom button, and then it spoke. "Inmate 521, return to your cell." I didn't move. Thought maybe a speaker had shorted and played a pre-recorded tape or something. But then the voice repeated, louder. "Inmate 521, return to your cell." The air dropped 10 degrees in a blink. My breath fogged in front of me. I stepped back, my boots crunching over gravel. That's when I saw the reflection in the glass of the booth. A man in a correctional officer's uniform stood behind me. Tall, stiff-backed, his face a void under the shadow of his cap. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just the corridor stretching behind me, lights still flickering one by one. Deeper into the east wing, drawing a path forward. I should have run then. But something about the voice, that command, it was like a hook lodged in my chest pulling me onward. The east wing had been the most completed part of the prison before they shut it down. The cells were built, doors installed, some even locked. I walked past row after row of iron-barred rooms, each one empty. Mostly. Some had mattresses, rotted and sunk in the middle. One had scratch marks on the wall, long gouges that looked more like claws than nails. I told myself it was animals. Raccoons, coyotes maybe, but none of it felt like the work of animals. It felt like desperation. Like someone had been trying to dig their way out with their own hands. As I rounded the corner near cell bit 12, I heard the first scream, muffled low and coming from deep inside the walls. Then came the footsteps, booted, rhythmic, like a guard on patrol. But I was the only one in that wing. I knew I was. I moved faster, trying to retrace my steps. But the hallway twisted in a way I didn't remember. Where I thought I'd come from, there was just another row of cells, identical to the last. Each one now filled. They weren't alive. Not quite. But they moved. Bodies crouched in the corners of their cells, hair matted, faces smeared with something dark. Eyes open wide but glassy, as if watching me through a veil of decades. One stood and stepped to the bars, mouth moving like it wanted to speak, but no sound came out. I turned, heart pounding, and ran. Every hallway looked the same, every door locked or welded shut. It felt like the building had changed, as if iron veil had shifted while I wasn't looking, curling inward, keeping me inside. I ended up in the mess hall, an enormous chamber with long steel tables bolted to the floor. Light spilled in through a row of grimy skylights, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd made it. But then I saw them, guards. 3 of them standing near the far wall in full uniform. They weren't moving, just staring. Their faces were wrong blurred, indistinct, like watercolors running in the rain. One of them raised a baton and pointed at me. I blinked and they were gone. The sound of boots on concrete came from every direction. I made it to the entrance eventually. Found the lobby again by sheer luck, or maybe by some twisted grace of the place itself. The air outside hit me like a slap, warm and dry and full of soundbirds, wind, the buzz of insects. I didn't even look back. I got in the truck, turned the key, and drove until my tires hit blacktop again. Even then I didn't stop. Not until I saw the lights of Del Rio. I tried to tell people. My wife, Sheriff McCready. Even Roy, though he just nodded like he'd already known. Nobody believed me. Said the place was just an unfinished shell. Sighed. It had no power, no security system, no working intercoms. But last week, someone posted drone footage of Iron Veil on a message board, some urban explorer with a GoPro trying to find ghost towns. The video shows the drone hovering above the compound, then dipping low over the cell blocks. At exactly 2 minutes and 17 seconds in, you can hear it barely over the wind. Inmate 521, return to your cell. That drone went dark 30 seconds later. They never found the pilot. only the controller left sitting on. The hood of a dust-covered truck parked just inside the gate. Mine. The first thing that struck me was how quiet it was up near Pecan Nail Ridge. Not country quiet. Not the kind of stillness you get on back roads with no cell towers or semis in earshot. It was the kind of quiet that felt artificial, like the world was holding its breath. I drove up that way in late August, chasing a story that never made it to print. They'd sent me from the Claiborne Record to investigate reports of illegal dumping in a private zone just west of Nolan counties. Fringe. What I found was something else. Something older. I didn't even notice the boundary line when I passed it. Not really. The trees didn't thin, and the asphalt didn't change texture, but something in the atmosphere twisted the minute I crossed into that ridge. My rental truck sputtered once, like the engine had caught a chill, and the air started smelling like burnt motor oil and something meatier, like old copper and something left to bake too long in the sun. There was no mistaking it for skunk or roadkill. This was heavier, more invasive, like it was on the inside of my nostrils. I rolled down the window to shake it off. Didn't help that it was only a few more miles to the ridge. They called it Pecan Nail because of the fence. That's what I'd been told. A fence built decades ago, topped with curled strands of rusted metal. Pecan wood posts rotted to splinters, all of it nailed shut with wide hand-forged nails black with time and weather. But it wasn't just the fencing that gave the ridge its name. The locals said the nails were also driven into trees, into the old wooden trail signs, into the rocks, even into the ground itself, where rust bled into the dirt like wounds that never healed. I parked about 100 feet from the first marker, an old cattle gate sealed with a crossbeam of rebar and 3 padlocks that hadn't seen keys in decades. On it hung 3 signs: nitrogen monoxide entry, property of Pecan County. And the last one, this one was painted by hand, simply read, "Stay gone." Of course, I didn't listen. You don't drive 2 hours in August heat just to turn around at the first threat of trespassing. I stepped through the barbed fence where someone had once cut a gap and never mended it. It had all grown back a bit, the wire pulled tight with dry vines and brambles, but you could squeeze through if you ducked. That's where I noticed the first nail. It jutted from a dead mesquite like a rotten tooth, thick and hand-shaped, with the head twisted like it had been struck by something unclean. It smelled like the tar pits out in East Texas. Not just tar, but decay trapped in it. The trail was nothing but dead leaves, dirt, and silence. Even the cicadas were gone. No birds, no wind. Just the occasional creak of trees leaning too far to one side, groaning under their own weight. I didn't bring a compass, but if I had, I'm certain it would have spun Dot after 20 minutes of slow climbing and brushing aside branches. I hit the first structure, or what was left of one. It had probably been a ranger's outpost once, a single-room shack with a busted door leaning off one hinge. More of those massive nails were driven into the doorframe like it had been sealed from the outside, hard and fast, as if something inside needed to be kept there. But the door had cracked open at some point, and something had gotten out. Inside, the shack was blackened by fire but didn't smell of smoke. It smelled of mold and something chemical, like preserved meat, like embalming fluid. In the corner sat an iron basin filled with what looked like melted wax and hair. Charred handprints on the ceiling, long and smeared, reached up like someone had tried to climb away from something on the floor. I didn't stay long. Whatever had been in there didn't want company, and I was starting to think I didn't either. Dot further. Up the trail, the ground changed texture. Crunchier, like walking on thin bones instead of twigs. The bark on the trees had gone dark and wet-looking, despite the drought. I crouched once and ran my fingers through the dirt. It came up black, sticky, and warm, like it had bled. I finally reached the ridge's highest point just before dusk. That's when I saw them, not structures, Not really. They looked like cages or cells, crudely welded together from fencing material and stacked logs, reinforced with those damn nails. There were 4 of them, arranged like points on a compass, with a large tree growing dead center. The tree was massive, leafless, and covered in carvings, names, dates, symbols I didn't recognize. Dozens of nails were hammered into its trunk. At irregular intervals, some of them bent, some halfway out, like they'd been forced back by something pushing from inside the wood dot at the base of the tree was a stone slab. Not an altar, nothing so ornate. Just a flat rock with streaks of dried brown down its sides and a dozen flies lazing over its surface. Something had been killed there. Not recently, but not long enough ago either. You could smell it. Like blood that had boiled, not spilled dot, and then I heard it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the wind. Then I realized there was no wind dot. The sound came from the far cage, the western one. A thudding, soft and rhythmic, like someone tapping a finger against metal. I stood frozen for a full minute, not breathing. Then I stepped closer, carefully. 1 footfall at a time. Inside the cage was a man, or it had been once. His skin was pale and loose, stretched in strange ways, like it didn't fit the bones underneath. His eyes were open but glazed, lips torn where they'd tried to speak, maybe scream. His arms were nailed, literally nailed, to the wooden beams behind him, wide iron spikes driven through each palm. And his legs, they weren't legs anymore. They'd been split open, hollowed out like sacks, and stuffed with what looked like black feathers and broken glass. He moved, barely twitching his fingers, like he wanted to reach but didn't have the strength. "Don't," he whispered. I didn't move. "Don't pull them out." I blinked. "The nails, don't." That's all he got out before his body slumped, bloodless and silent. I backed away. I shouldn't have come. This wasn't a place for stories or photographs or exposes. This ridge wasn't forgotten. It was avoided. For good reason. On the way back down, I saw the prints. They hadn't been there before. Bare feet, big ones, with long, narrow toes. Too long. They were pressed deep into the dirt like whatever made them was heavy, wrong heavy. And the smell? That got worse. The closer I got to the gap in the fence, the more I felt it in my throat. The tar, the blood, the stink of things left too long in the dark. I crawled through that fence and didn't stop until I was back in my truck. When I started the engine, the radio came on, even though it had been off before. Static. No station. Just white noise, and beneath it, a low voice whispering something over and over. I couldn't understand it. Not then, but later, when I listened back to my recorder, I caught a word. Nail, nail. I drove home that night without stopping. Didn't file the story. Didn't tell the editor. I tried to forget. 2 weeks later, I started finding them nails in my apartment, in my truck, in my shoes. Old, rusted, wide-headed things that smelled of blood and smoke. I threw them out, but they came back. Not the same ones, different lengths, different weights. Some bent, some still wet. Then I started hearing the tapping. Now I don't sleep. I keep all the lights on. I listen to the air for changes. I haven't gone back to Pecan Nail Ridge, but I know it's coming for me. Bit by bit, some places don't stay. Sealed forever. And sometimes, the things we find out there don't stay behind the fence. Sometimes they find ways in, especially if you weren't supposed to leave in the first place. They say the name Mason's Cut came from the way the land itself looked, a raw, jagged wound split through the pine woods about 3 miles west of Junction, Texas, just past the old cattle fence where the ground starts sloping down. Like something heavy once fell through it. But most folks around didn't talk about the topography. The real cut was what it did to the people. the ones who went missing, the ones who came back wrong, and the ones who didn't come back at all. My cousin Ty was one of those. That's how I got roped into the damn place. Back in the fall of '99, Ty was 25, cocky as hell, drove a beat-up green Ram, and lived out of the storage shed behind his uncle's mechanic shop. He had that grin, the kind that made you think he never worried about anything. Then one day, he up and vanished like smoke off hot asphalt. Left his truck idling outside Miller's Gas and Grub, engine still warm, keys on the dash. No signs of a struggle. Just gone. I was 2 years older, already working a dead-end job inventorying parts in San Angelo, bored out of my mind and too broke to move on. When Aunt Lisa called crying and asking me to come help look, I figured it was something. I didn't believe in the stories back then. I thought people made up ghost roads and killer woods because they couldn't handle how big and empty West Texas really is. That kind of nothingness will chew holes in your brain if you let it. Mason's Cut wasn't on the GPS, not anymore. Ty's buddy from high school, a twitchy guy named Curtis who had a limp and chain-smoked Marlboros, said he and Ty were heading out there the night before he vanished. Said Ty wanted to see the shelf again, whatever that meant. Curtis didn't go with him. He claimed he got a flat and turned back. Didn't stop Ty, though. Said he heard something out there, Curtis mumbled. In the dark. Not a coyote, not a bobcat. Something talking. That should have been enough to keep me from going. But I kept seeing Ty's face in my sleep, not like a dream, like he was trying to say something. Standing just out of reach, eyes wide, mouth moving but no sound. The last time I saw him alive, he'd handed me a cassette tape and said, "Play this next time you're driving past the quarry." But only there. I never did. I'd tossed it into my glove box and forgot about it until that week. It was still there, dusty and cracked. I drove out to Mason's Cut late on a Thursday. Weather was dry, moonless, and thick with that kind of stale heat you only get when the earth's holding its breath. The road got worse the closer I got. Asphalt turned to gravel, gravel to packed dirt, dirt to nothing but ruts. I kept going. I wasn't smart enough to stop. Around midnight, I hit the tree line, and the woods swallowed the headlights like fog. No wind, no bugs, no owls. Just a hush so deep it made my ears ring. I stopped the truck on a patch of uneven ground and cut the engine. My breath sounded too loud. I reached for the tape. Slid it into the old player. It started with static. Then a faint rhythm like a heartbeat. Then Ty's voice, low and slow. "If you're hearing this, I'm already gone. Don't come looking." I froze. I thought I could hear it too. The voice in the cut, but it ain't a voice. Not really. It sounds like you. It knows things. It shows you what you want then. It takes it. And when it's done, it puts something else in your place. Something you don't recognize in the mirror. There was more static, then a scraping sound, then nothing. I sat there in the dark, not daring to breathe. Then I heard it, a whisper outside the passenger window. It sounded like Ty. I killed. The tape and looked. Nothing but trees and blackness. Then the whisper again, now at the driver's side. "Jake," it said. My name, like Ty used to say it when we were kids, soft and teasing. "You remember the shelf?" I got out of the truck, flashlight in hand, and turned in a slow circle. No wind, no sound. Just that pressure, like the air was too heavy. Then I saw something through the trees. A pale strip of land cut into the slope ahead like a scar. The shelf. I moved toward it without thinking, like I was being pulled. The ground was soft, spongy. It didn't crunch underfoot. It gave way, like walking on old flesh. The trees thinned and I saw the edge, the place they called Mason's. Cut. It wasn't natural. It was wide. Maybe 60 feet across and so straight it hurt to look at. The ground dropped into pitch black. Not like a canyon, more like an absence, like the earth just stopped existing down there. But it wasn't empty. Things moved in it. Shapes. Faces, maybe. Eyes. I tried to turn back, but my legs locked. Then I heard Ty again behind me. "You could jump," he said. "It doesn't hurt, you just change." I spun around. He was there. Or something wearing his face. Eyes too wide, skin too clean, like it had been ironed smooth. His grin wasn't right. I took a step back and he mirrored it forward. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he whispered. I raised the flashlight. The beam passed through. Him, no shadow, no wait dot, then the wind started. Cold, metallic, coming from the cut. And in it, voices not loud, not screams. Familiar ones, my mother long dead, my old dog Buster, my high school crush, all whispering at once, overlapping, tempting, pleading. I ran. Branches whipped my face. My feet slipped on the spongy ground. Something followed. Not Ty, not anything. Human. I never turned to look. You don't look at things like that. You just run and hope they forget you. I made it back to the truck, slammed the door, and hit the ignition. It didn't start. Dead. My chest heaved. Then I looked up and saw the road was gone. Trees had closed in. The world past the windshield was just more woods. But the rearview mirror that showed the cut, still there. Still waiting. I didn't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, it was morning. Birds were chirping. Sun was up, and the road was back. I drove like hell. Didn't stop till I hit Junction. Nobody believed me, of course. They said grief messes with your head. Ty probably ran off or ODD or got lost in the desert. But every now and then someone else would vanish. Hikers, drifters. A whole wedding party once back in 2011. Same place. Same pattern. No remains. No calls. And every few years I get a letter. No return address. Just one sentence. You could still jump. I burned them all. But I know one day I won't. One day I'll play that tape again. One day when the air smells just like it did that night, coppery and sweet, like wet rust. I'll drive out there again. And I won't come back because no one drives back from Mason's Cut.